Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We're going to continue on with looking at Nehemiah Gordon's material. And so Nehemiah is a Hebrew guy who has become quite prominent in many Christian circles as well. And so he is renowned for examining the name of Jehovah and proving that the name of Jehovah is the correct name of the Hebrews. And so we're looking at 1,000 manuscripts with Jehovah at nehemiahswall.com. So this is part of a playlist. And so in this playlist, last time I went through, I think it was like 7 videos in this playlist. And we want to just continue through these videos and just examine the name of Jehovah. And so this is relevant to the study that I've been doing at Revelation 16:5 and the book that I've written on Revelation 16:5. And so this is quite relevant to do with that. And so it's quite interesting to find out all about the name of Jehovah and how the Hebrews used to write the name of Jehovah. One of the interesting things is listening to Nehemiah. He'll get a document and he'll prove that they left out the name of Jehovah in many places. And then what they did is they came back and they filled in those blank places with the name of Jehovah, because you can tell by the size of the lettering or sometimes the different types of inks that we used. And so it's quite amazing looking at that. And we want to learn as much as possible about the name of Jehovah, considering that this is one of the main arguments that I use for proving that Revelation 16:5, the reading that is in Theodore Beza's 1598 Textus Receptus of homenos, which translates in the King James and shall be, that the hoon kahoen kahoekomenos, the one which art and wast and shall be, is a correct reading, that it is not just a conjectural emendation or interpolation with no evidence behind it. I want to show you that this is the elephant in the room that I'm always trying to get people to look at and examine, but people want to look at the Ethiopic and a whole bunch of other things, which is fine. I'm into looking into that as well. But to me, a lot of that stuff is secondary. When it comes to internal evidence, what a lot of text critics will do is they'll do a series on textual criticism, and they'll say, hey, there's things like homoioteliaton, architeliaton, parablepsis, and sometimes this has this has ramifications on how you're looking at manuscripts. And so you might be reading along and you skip a line, or you might have a similar ending or a similar beginning. And we know this ourselves. We're reading a book and you might have an and at the end of the line, but the next line has an and as well. And so you actually skip down a line. So this is homoioteliaton, the similar endings, architeliaton, the similar beginnings. And text critics will teach this. They'll tell people that this is part of textual criticism. We've got to examine these things. We've got to examine the internal evidence. But what I find is when I'm talking to text critics, specifically people who are critical text advocates, what they tend to do is just jump from the internal evidence to just go to a majority text position. And all of a sudden they want the majority of text to say a certain thing, where most of the time, when there's variance in their text, it's not majority based. And so usually, like say the last 12 verses of Mark, you're only looking at 2 manuscripts that omit those entire 12 verses. It's Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And so obviously they're not interested in the majority. But when it comes to readings in the Textus Receptus that mightn't be based on the majority, all of a sudden they become majority text people and they want to find all these manuscripts everywhere. And it's like, well, why don't you apply that same standard to yourself? Great example is the Comma Johanneum. Now, the Textus Receptus advocates have a very good understanding of why the comma dropped out of the Greek transmission, but it is not in 95% of the Latin transmission. So it's a vast majority in the Latin. But also it's mostly, Textus Receptus advocates will mostly look at the internal evidence of 1 John 5:7 and look at the solecism that's there. So there's a huge solecism, which is basically a Greek grammatical error. So this grammatical error causes verse 8 to be modified in a way that shows that verse 7 should be there. And so most people think verse 7 should be omitted, but the Greek language is an inflected language. The words do change, things are modified. And so you can tell that there is a grammatical error in the text there, but they don't really want to talk about that. They want to all of a sudden go into majority text mode and go, well, where are all the Greek manuscripts? And it's like, well, do the Latin manuscripts just disappear? What about all the early church writings that contain this reading in Greek and in Latin? And so what we find is there is a huge hypocrisy in the critical text camp. Now, if you're a majority text person, like someone like James Snap isn't so much a majority text person, but he is equitable eclecticism. Now, if he comes up with that, yeah, that's his position. Byzantine priority guys, yes, that's their position. But critical text guys, it's just laughable. And so anyway, what I find is people are trying to look for a majority text reading when they themselves don't hold to that standard. Now, what's happened over the years is there's been a conflation of terms. The majority text was a printed text in the 1980s. Now, before then, it appeared in, many people have Green's interlinear Hebrew and Greek. If you look at the back of that, it's got the puppy feet of the 1980s printed edition with a whole bunch of majority text readings, a list of those readings there. And this was through Pickering, Farstead picked up on this, and Hodges and a bunch of other guys, and they created basically the majority text movement. But this actually went back to Dean John William Burgon. So Dean John William Burgon, he basically said, look, I'm defending the Textus Receptus, I'm defending the King James, but he actually didn't. He went on to defend what's called the traditional text, which is more like a Greek Byzantine priority position. And so he would say there's errors in the TR, there's errors in the King James, but he had enough bullets. It's just like James Snap Jr. would have enough bullets to come against Westcott and Hort and their nonsense. But he actually inadvertently sort of created the majority text movement. And so that moves on in time through Herman Hoskier, and then you've got people like Miller who were basically printing Burgon's material after he departed. Scrivener in a loose way, because he was still with Westcott and Hort. And when you look at his books, his list of verses that he wanted to omit from the Textus Receptus and from the King James Version was continually growing. It started off with about 25 verses, and by the end he's got like 43 verses that he wants to delete, so he's got lots and lots of problems with the TR and King James Version. And so, but up until basically 1960s, 1980s, the Textus Receptus was named the majority text, and the critical text was called the minority text. Okay, these were just labels that were put on there. It's like the label Textus Receptus. It's been retroactively put on any text of the Reformation period. So, many people will even see the Complutensian Polyglot, 1514, 1516, first edition of Erasmus, right up to his fifth edition in 1535. Any edition, there's about 100 Greek editions that appear during that period, and they're all sort of labeled TR editions. Now, some people will only say like Scrivener and Beza are TR editions. They don't even want to touch Erasmus because he was still part of the Roman Catholic Church. But any edition really can be labeled a Textus Receptus. So it's just a label. And this is where it's quite disingenuous for people like Mark Ward to come along and go, well, there's 100 different Texti Recepti editions, or he says there's 30. Which one is it? And it's like most people are very specific about which one. Now, my position, I believe, is the best possible position for any TR advocate or anyone who is labeled King James only. My position is that the underlying Greek text of the 1611 Bible is the final Textus Receptus edition that I accept. And so Scrivener, he attempted to make this 250 years later. I think he did a pretty good job. It's the vast majority of it is identical to what the King James translators would have formulated. But there's just a few little issues here and there, a few typos, a few, amens missing, few, things like that. But on a whole, it's very well known. And the King James translators used the 1598 of Theodore Beza. Now, there's only about 20 departures from that, as far as I can ascertain. I've gone through quite a lot of these. Most of them are phonetic. They're to do with like saying Nazareth or Nazareth. Now, Scrivener seems to think that that's very important. I guess it is to the Greek text, but it's not really important to an English text, because in England, they were going to put, say, the name James there, no matter how it was spelled, Jacobus, or if it had a different way of spelling, they were always going to put James there. And at the end of the day, these type of issues, that there's probably about 170 issues that Scrivener talked about that are really sort of non-issues, that they're to do with phonetics, they're to do with the, where it says it might say John, or the revelation of Saint John the Divine, and it mightn't have or Saint John or something like that, or Saint in it. And so they're like, well, and arguing about things that aren't really the type of things that people look at when they're looking at Textus Receptus advocacy and things like that. So I've counted about 20 differences between Theodore Beza's 1598 and the underlying Greek text that the King James translators formulated. So the King James translators were very highly educated. They were able to formulate their own Hebrew and Greek text, which they did. Now, that became quite authoritative. So English became authoritative. Just like the Latin had for many years, English all of a sudden became the language that you go to. And so even the Dutch Statenvertaling, the vast majority of that Bible is identical to the King James Bible. And so the choices that they made have become definitive. As I mentioned, 250 years later, FHA Scrivener, he's done his Textus Receptus edition. Now, they recognize that Ellicott group, the translation committee, I guess you'd call them the Westcott and Hort group, they commissioned Scrivener to make the Textus Receptus that the King James translators never did. So they basically just created the English, where they had an underlying Greek text, they had an underlying Hebrew text, didn't differ that much from what was already around, but it was enough to go, well, this is actually a different edition. And so had they done a parallel Greek or Hebrew text, there would be no separation between the Textus Receptus and the King James only movements for a vast majority of these issues. But they didn't, and so that's why people now, they carry Scrivener's text and say, well, that's the closest Greek text that we have that underlies the King James. So I just sort of let you know where I'm coming from, and so that's the position that I hold. But we're dealing with the name of Jehovah, okay? So we really want to switch gears and start talking about this. Now, last time I went through quite a lot of Nehemiah's material. Now, at the time, I was really showing people how I don't know much about Nehemiah's material, because one thing that you do get accused of is just stealing people's stuff. Now, I've written the book on Revelation 16:5, and I've always attributed the name of Jehovah and the discovery that I had of the name of Jehovah to a guy called Scott Jones. So in 2001, he wrote an article about Jehovah. He related it to the theophoric names. He also talked about how the name of God was condensed in the theophoric names. So Jehoshaphat became Josaphat, Jehoiakim became Joachim, those sort of things. And he goes through and has quite an elaborate and sophisticated understanding of why this happened. Now, I've jumped on board with that material. I've used it in my defense of the name of Jehovah. I've come against the name of Yahweh. And at the same time, Nehemiah's material was popping up on Facebook and things like that. And I guess inadvertently, I've credited Stephen Avery as having a lot of influence on me about the name of Yahweh. But it was probably actually Nehemiah Gordon's material inadvertently influencing what I was saying there. But at the end of the day, regardless of how we've gotten to our conclusions, we just want truth. And I think that's the main thing. Now, Nehemiah, he's not a born-again Christian. I didn't know that. I actually thought he was a Christian because many times I would look at a video and he'd be there with a Christian. I think, okay, I'll watch that later. And so that shows you how much I know about the guy, hardly anything. But it's been about a month, probably about 5 or 6 weeks since I've done my first video. So we just want to jump straight into this. And so there was one video that I actually skipped. I think it was the name of God here, which went for 49 minutes. And by the looks of it, the other ones have, they all have the red line under it, which means that I have watched them last time. But we want to start with the 1,000 manuscript announcement and go through that. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll jump on number 3 here. We'll go through the name of God. And because it went for 49 minutes, I thought, well, it's going to take up all our time. And so anyway, let's have a look at what's going on with these 1,000 manuscripts.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is no controversy anymore. Every bit of evidence that we have tells us how his name is to be pronounced.
למען ציון לא אחשה, ולמען ירושלים לא אשקוט.
You are listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemiah Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemiah's McCore Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiahswall.com.
Shalom, this is Nehemiah Gordon, and welcome to Hebrew Voices. This episode is a special celebration on the occasion of finding the 1,000th Hebrew Bible manuscript with the full vowels Jehovah. I want you to hear from some of the team scouring Hebrew Bible manuscripts in libraries around the world, looking for the name Jehovah, and others who have been key in spreading the truth about this vital information to Israel and the nations. I begin the conversation with Michael Rood.
I was doing a series, the Rood Awakening series from Israel at that time, and I had already filmed and had heavily invested in the name Yahweh. And even today, now it is more than 250,000 DVDs that have gone out over the world. And I was so invested in this that I did not want to listen to Nehemiah's explanation in his research, which began really at 4 years of age as he began learning Hebrew. And he wanted to know the name, and it was such a passion for him. But honestly, I did not want to listen to him because I had already put my flag on the mountain. I didn't want to listen to him. But a few years passed, and he brought forth evidence that I knew I could no longer ignore. Yesterday, I got a call from Nehemiah Gordon, and this is a truly historic event that transpired just yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, Nehemiah Gordon. Welcome, Nehemiah.
Shalom, Michael. It's great to be here. This really is an historic discovery. For the last 17 years, this has been my passion to find God's name in the Hebrew really more than 17 years, but 17 years ago, I found the first two manuscripts with the full vowels Jehovah, and that's what I shared with you. And Michael, what I loved about you from the moment I met you at that cafe is you had this yearning for truth. And yes, you were invested in DVDs, but the bottom line is, what is the truth of the creator of the universe? And that's, I think, how we connected there. We've now accessed thousands of manuscripts, and as of this recording, we now have 1,010 manuscripts of the Bible in Hebrew with the full vowels Jehovah. And this blows my mind, Michael. The name has been a secret for over 1,000 years. And when the information started to come out, some of the detractors said, well, that's just this one scribe. Well, that's just two scribes. Well, that's just 5 scribes. Now it's 1,010 manuscripts, and these go back to the earliest manuscripts.
So the only thing I'd have a bit of pushback there with is all the way through the Reformation period, people knew that the name of God was Jehovah, which is basically just the anglicized name of saying Jehovah. And so I guess, for Nehemiah, he's like, well, it's been lost to the Jewish-speaking people. But I'm pretty sure the sources that I have, many people from different denominations, some of the confessional bibliology guys, they have proven that the name of Jehovah was very popular. People were doing commentaries on this name, explaining how it is the name. And so I guess for Nehemiah, he's sort of saying, well, this has been hidden from his people, from the Jewish people. And now it's like a revival of this information, where for the Christian, this has been the normal name all the way through. Now, Gesenius, he came up with this concept of Yahweh. He was a brilliant Hebrew linguist, but he actually retracted that, because he basically said that the Hebrews borrowed the name from an ancient pagan god, and so he was saying Yahweh is related to Jupiter or Yahweh Pitta, and he retracted this information. Tregellus, who did I guess an English rendition of his German or Germanic Hebrew lexicon. In this section, there are many brackets where he's saying, well, this concept has been retracted. This is no longer his position, etc. And so even he retracted it, but it's just become popularized in churches. People think that the name of God is Yahweh, which actually that's saying the name of Jupiter. It's like, yeah, guys, get the right name of your God. It's quite. I guess I've got a bit more compassion than some people do on folks who say this name, because I've been in church services where the whole chorus is Yahweh, Yahweh, and I'm just there going, because I've known about this material for a long time. This is in my 2019 book. I wrote an article in 2016 about it, and so many times I'm there just sort of cringing about this Yahweh material. But when it comes to the name Jehovah, my pushback here is that in Christian circles, this has been well known, and the name of Jehovah has been thoroughly defended for many, many years. And so I just thought I'd say that.
Manuscripts with vowels from the year 895 for 1,000 years, for over 1,000 years, all the way up until they stopped making manuscripts. Throughout this entire period, the scribes consistently, when they put in the full vowels, they put them in as Jehovah. And I'll tell you, Michael, I come at this as a scholar. If I found out his name was something else, this is what I learned at the university. You can't have a dog in the fight. You've got to look for truth, and you have to accept that truth even if it's inconvenient and it doesn't match your preconceptions. So if I had found that his name was Yahweh, I would have embraced that. I would have no problem with that.
And this is one of the things I like about Nehemiah, is he is mostly, for the most part, just talking about scholarship, and not like a Bart Ehrman type of thing where he's got 1,000 presuppositions or a whole bunch of other weird and strange concepts from other scholars, and he's just saying them just for a sound bite or for for clickbait sort of thing. Nehemiah seems to have jumped in on this with both feet and saying, well, I think this is very defensible. And so a lot of people might actually wonder why I'm showing the material of someone who's not, a born-again Christian who is just an Israeli guy. But at the end of the day, I'm interested in linguistics. When I contacted Georgios Babiniotis about the solecism at 1 John 5:7, one of the greatest Greek grammarians alive today, he's written 6 dictionaries and he's written 200 books on the Greek language. And so he said, 1 John 5:7 needs to be there for 1 John 5:8 to have the readings that it does. And so I wasn't approaching him as a person of faith or as a born-again Christian. When I wrote my Easter article and proved that Easter is not a pagan festival, but it actually means resurrection, that it comes from the German word Auferstehung, which means resurrection. It's Oster in the German. When I talked to David Crystal in 2005, who's probably the world-leading expert in the English language, I wasn't approaching him. He's apparently a Catholic. I don't really know that much about his faith, but he is considered one of the best linguists in the English language. So when I contacted him, he had a whole bunch of material that he shared with me, and he went through my article. He pointed out where there was some good and bad and things like that, and so I amended my article accordingly. But that's how I see Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah, obviously, he knows the Hebrew language very well. He is a Hebrew linguist. He understands these things very well, and he explains them in layman's terms, which is very helpful for us because a lot of Christians might know about Greek, because most of our battlefield is actually in the Greek New Testament field because of what's happened with Westcott and Hort, and because these two horrible, disgusting manuscripts of Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have been exalted to godlike status. We have to deal with all their rubbish readings, and so we're constantly going through saying, no, that's not the reading, this is the reading, so we're constantly going through Greek and maybe a bit of Latin here and there. But it's great to be doing some Hebrew, because this is a hot button topic. I remember when it was probably about 20 years ago, I was learning Hebrew. It was actually 2003, I think. I was learning Hebrew, and the first class that I went to, they were all talking about the Tetragrammaton. Now, I guess this is usually something that people, Jehovah's Witnesses are very fascinated with this type of material. Most Christians, they tend to shy away from things that, if there's a cult involved, they tend to shy away from everything to do with it. And so all you have to do is say the King James only cult, and so people are King James cult, they shy away from it. If you say Jehovah's Witnesses, the name of Jehovah, shy away from it. And so many times these are areas of fascination, and many times these are areas that have been polluted, and we want to get the truth of it. Because if you can't get the name of God right, what chance have you got of getting anything else right? This is mentioned like over 7,000 times in the Hebrew Bible. If we can't get that right, we've got in Australia we say they've got Buckleys of getting anything else right, which means that they don't have a chance. This is one of the things with looking at critics of the Textus Receptus, critics of the Masoretic text, and critics of the King James. Many people are saying, well, the name is Yahweh, and they're adamant in this. And all you have to do is just look at the history of the name of Yahweh and how it was popularized by Gesenius, and it's the name of Jupiter. It's quite amazing that people are defending this, and people are looking at these things and saying that this is the truth. So anyway, let's let Nehemiah continue.
I didn't find that. I've been looking for Yahweh. I have a team of volunteers now, and I tell them, if you ever find any other vowels, let me know. We found 2 manuscripts out of the thousands we've looked at that have alternative vowels that do not have the vowels shvacholam kamatz. Instead, they have shvacholam patach, which guess how that's pronounced in Hebrew, Michael? That's also pronounced Jehovah. So out of all the manuscripts, only 2 have this alternative, and that's still Jehovah. We now have 3 manuscripts with a Babylonian pointing, which is an alternative dialect of Hebrew, not the standard Hebrew you find in printed Bibles and in most manuscripts. It was used by the Jews of Babylonia and in Yemen, and there it's also Jehovah. I mean, all of the evidence now is converging, and it's really definitive. I put out a study recently on my website, nehemiaswall.com, called The Mistake That Got It Right. And there I go through some of the new discoveries we found. And we found things in these manuscripts nobody knows about, things that you won't find in any introduction to biblical Hebrew or any teaching on the textual criticism, because we're looking through these manuscripts and we're finding new things. And I put that in my study. Another study I did is 10 rabbis who speak out on the name. Those 2 studies together really bring together a large portion of this. I'm working on future studies, which are really going to lay out all this evidence. Michael, I want to tell you the verse in which we found it, which is one of the coolest things in this whole story. So I pull up the manuscript. It's number 1000. And I go to see, well, what's the passage? I look it up in the context of my Bible permit. The first thing that appears to me is Deuteronomy 18, verse 5. And it's only 3 words on the line that have survived. Part of it's missing, eaten by worms. The words that survive is Lisharet b'shem Yehovah, to serve the name of Jehovah. And that's the 1000th manuscript that has the full vowels Jehovah. Later down in that column of the same page is Deuteronomy 18, verse 15. A prophet from your midst, from your brothers like me, Jehovah your God will raise up from you, and you will listen to him, obey him. And that had the full vowels, Jehovah, Michael. That was the second witness. And Michael, may that prophet, may he come soon. We both standing before him and proclaiming the name of his father, Jehovah. May that be soon. Amen.
Amen.
There's this verse in Psalm 148. It says, kings of the earth and all peoples, princes and all judges of the earth, both young men and maidens, old men and women, let them praise the name of Jehovah. His name alone is exalted. His glory is above the earth and heaven. And so this is a verse, Michael, that talks about the importance of the name for all peoples, not just Jews. Every human being on planet Earth needs to know what this name is and be able to proclaim it. And now, after over 1,000 years of the name being hidden, it's being proclaimed throughout the world through this evidence, this overwhelming evidence of 1,000 Hebrew Bible manuscripts.
And so it must be an interesting thing for Nehemiah to go like to all this work, to do all this work and to do all this study, and then turn around and go, actually, the King James only guys have been discussing this for a long time. And this is one of the things that attracted me to the movement of, the Textus Receptus movement, King James movement, is because of things like this. When I actually read Scott Jones's article in 2001 article, and this is before Nehemiah knew this material, when I discovered the name of Jehovah, I was like, no, hardly anyone knows this. And when I read his Easter article, I was like, this is really good material. But the only reason that people were rejecting it is because he said the King James was accurate. So he was labeled a King James only guy. So no one would read his stuff. So what I did is I basically sort of repackaged the whole Easter thing. I did a bunch of study myself as well on that. But at the end of the day, it was pretty much a Scott Jones rehash. I put that out, and Answers in Genesis ran with it. They were like, this is fantastic. Jonathan Sephardi, he talked about, lots of people talked about it and said, oh, it's not a pagan festival and all the rest of it. And all I did was leave the King James only label off it. And people were like, it's great scholarship. And then when I started gravitating more towards the King James position, oh, you're one of them. Okay, we won't listen to your stuff anymore. It's like there is such a bias against people who follow the King James, and people are poisoned in their mind against it. And so that's where usually when I'm talking to people, I've used this example many times, but when I was speaking to Peter Gurry on some chat group on Facebook, and we were discussing something else, but I mentioned, well, you're straining at a gnat and you're swallowing a camel. And he said, look, you can't even get that scripture right. It's straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. I said, well, I know Scrivener in his 1873 paragraph Bible, he has that reading, but it's not correct. And what I sort of knew that it was going to come to a head with that one, because he wanted to argue it. So what I did is I got James Snap's side, and he's on my side on that issue, and I just basically copied and pasted things from James Snap's site without letting him know that where I got it. And he just argued against it. No, you're an idiot. This, no. He didn't say I was an idiot. He was just basically saying I was wrong. You're wrong, wrong, wrong. Then James Snap jumped on the chat and said, no, Nick's right. And he put his article there, and Peter Gary read through and went, oh, yeah. Thanks, James. No, it's okay. Well, yeah, that is correct. And then he just went silent. So what it shows me is that most of the time, if you just label someone, if you label your opponent, oh, this person's a pedophile, or this person's a closet Jesuit, or this person's a whatever. People, they just see you with these colored glasses on, and they can't see anything else. And that's like Peter Gary. I was saying exactly the same things that James Snap Jr. was saying, which he probably got from Stephen Avery anyway. And he wouldn't accept it at all. But when James Snap turned up, he's accepting everything. It's like, so you're not actually looking at the scholarship. You're trying to win an argument. So anyway, let's continue. But A. Hannah says you have to applaud his enthusiasm. This guy is so stoked that he is making these discoveries. It's quite amazing. And when I listen to his material, he's so easy to listen to because he's so excitable about these things. And I think he's doing a lot of videos lately. Now, obviously, there's the war that's in the Middle East at the moment, which is terrible. And the thing is, too, a lot of Christians can jump on board and go, well, Israel are at fault, or the Palestinians are at fault. And usually there's the Fox News sort of narrative or the left narrative. And you just sort of left there going, yeah, but you got to think, guys, these are humans. These are people. I know people who are on the Palestinian side. I know people on the Israeli side. And it's, regardless of the right, the wrong. I mean, you could go on all day about who's right and wrong about, the Germans and the British and the Russians, all in World War II. And, the root causes of everything. Oh, well, the Germans were treated bad after World War One, and, they were pushed into a scenario, and, capitalism and, socialism, there was these ideologies. But, I mean, the British were pretty bad. They were, 10 million Indians, dying of starvation. You notice they haven't had any famines since the English left India. And there's a reason for that. You know what I mean? And so people like that, there's black and white view of history and the good guys and the bad guys. And I just sort of see everyone as sort of bad guys, and it makes it a lot easier to makes it a lot more palatable to understand history and to swallow truth. When you go, well, the Americans are probably just as bad as this other group, the Russians are probably just as bad as this other group, or the Ukrainians are just as bad, you just realize that very rarely are there just the good guys and the bad guys, But we love those type of narratives. It makes a good movie, but very rarely is it reality. And so at the end of the day, obviously Nehemiah is caught in the middle of this. He's an Israeli guy. And for Israeli people, they just see that, bombs have come over the border and bombed their next door neighbor's house to bits, and their neighbors have died. A friend of mine, he's there was going to come out to Australia, an Israeli girl, and a friend of the family and everything like that, and she died. So she's not coming out to Australia. Yeah, so how do you think they feel? They're like, we hate these people, But then on the other side, you've got, well, they just bombed this house, here in Gaza or wherever. My uncle and auntie just died, or my cousin just died, And so there's, in war, there's no victors. There's that really good song, war, what's it good for, and all that. And I think, as Christians, many times we can jump on sides, which looks good on a Facebook post. It makes you look like the alpha male type of guy. But at the end of the day, when you're dealing with real people and real hurts, and, 30 years later, you go visit a place and all the shops are still burnt out and people are living in misery, you just sort of think, oh, was it really worth it? And so anyway, that's my 5 minutes of hate. Man at his best state is altogether vanity. Yes, summed it up beautifully there, Hannah? Love it.
It's incredible, Michael. Incredible.
It is. Jeremiah's prophecy is now coming to pass. The Gentiles coming to Israel from the ends of the earth, crying out in repentance for the abominations that they inherited. And the Almighty says, because they cry out in repentance, he will make his name, Jehovah, known to the Gentiles. And this is the moment. 1,000 Hebrew manuscripts of the rabbis, as you say, 10, I believe it's now 16 rabbis.
It's 16 rabbis, 16 rabbis. And if you want to be precise, there's 1,010 Hebrew Bible manuscripts as of this recording. We found 10 more.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is no controversy anymore. Every bit of evidence that we have tells us how his name is to be pronounced. It's not up to the Gentiles to try to figure it out. It is in the ancient Hebrew manuscripts, and it tells us exactly. Nehemiah, thank you.
Shalom, Dawn.
Shalom, Nehemiah.
Dawn, I am really excited because we just reached 1,000 manuscripts with the full vowels, and you were part of that. And I want you to share with the people some of the things that you experienced in helping us get to this goal. And before you do that, I want to tell people, Dawn, that you're part of a very small group of people in the world. In fact, there's only 3 of them who I call the 100 Club. People who have found the name with full vowels Jehovah in 100 manuscripts or more. And you just literally joined that club very recently. And how does that feel to have found the name Jehovah in 100 Bible manuscripts in Hebrew?
It feels amazing. I love being part of this. It's been an honor. It's been so satisfying, so rewarding to see his name preserved over the millennia so that we can know it today. It's prophecy being fulfilled before our eyes, and it is so exciting.
Amen. So, Dawn, how many hours do you think you've spent searching for the name?
Now, just one thing I've noticed is these Hebrew guys, I think Nehemiah is a Kerathite Jew. They are very excited about prophecies being fulfilled, and just like if you were talking to someone about the second coming of Jesus, and Jesus is coming back and we're seeing all the signs and the end is coming and these guys are saying that this is a huge sign for Israel. Now you got to understand too that these guys will be promoting a type of Zionism that I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but I can't stop from happening. It's like looking at colonialism. I mean, colonialism happened. There's not much I can do about it. I don't necessarily agree that just down the road here, the basically white population threw 120 Aboriginals off the cliff here, and they were slaughtering Aboriginals here in this region, and just they were basically on the flora and fauna list up until 1972. And so many of these Aboriginals were shot and killed, and that's why there's not that many around. And so do I agree with that? Do I agree with the whole white Australia policy, treating these people as second-class citizens, killing them so that they could be in the British Museum because of evolution? I don't agree with all that. And so I don't necessarily agree with the modus operandi of how things are happening. But God, many times, regardless of how they're happening, he just points to the facts that these things are going to happen. And I believe that Israel has a huge part to play in the end times. I mean, all you have to do is read Matthew 24. If you stop listening to Anderson and Donny Budinski and McMurtry and all these other guys, you can clearly see it says those who are in Judea flee. It's talking about Israel. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, all this sort of stuff, it's talking about Israel. And it's very clear. These guys, that they tend to have a black and white type of theology. It's either for Israel or it's not for Israel. And so we're going to be listening to almost the exact opposite of that, where these guys are seeing prophecies fulfilled to do with the Jews being back in the land and them pushing back the Palestinians and things like that.
Well, I get up in the morning, I get my coffee, lately tea, and I sit at my computer, and every spare moment when I'm not working on something else, I'm looking for the name.
Wow.
until I go to bed at night.
That's amazing. That's pretty much my life too.
Yeah, it's totally addictive.
Isn't it? Well, I'm looking at these statistics here, and you went through something called the Lewis Gibson collection, and there's 592 manuscripts in that collection, and in that, you found the name in 88 of those. I mean, one of the things I've heard from some of the critics is, well, yeah, the name's everywhere. Those are the vowels of Adonai, so they just put them everywhere. But you're looking in 592 manuscripts, and of that, you only find it in 88. That's 15%. That means you're not finding it far more often than you are finding it. Is that frustrating?
No, it's not frustrating. Every single manuscript to me is beautiful because it's the preservation of his language. And so they're beautiful in their own right. But when you find the name with full vowels, it's just a special treasure, and you've found something amazing. So I enjoy every bit of it, but finding his name, when I find that 15%, it keeps me going. I love being part of this whole project.
Wow. And I know some of the manuscripts you've looked through in the British Library were very long manuscripts, and you didn't find the name with full vowels.
700 pages.
So you went through 700 pages and you didn't find the name with full vowels. And I want to share this story. So I sent you this other manuscript to look through, and you write back to me almost immediately, and you say, something's wrong. I'm finding it everywhere.
I literally did think something was wrong because I knew how rare it was to find his name in a manuscript. You could look through 40 pages and then maybe you find one. And then you look through another 50 and then you maybe find one more. So I start in Genesis on this manuscript, and there it is. Genesis 2, right away.
Genesis
and then
2:4,
I keep going page after page after page. And so I'm like, something must be wrong here. I better message Nehemiah and find out.
The manuscript's broken. It's cooperating. Well, I mean, and then I understand after you went through a 700-page manuscript and didn't find the name with full vowels even once, and you open up this other manuscript and it's just, they're everywhere. And that's actually a relatively new discovery we made in the last year, that in some of the manuscripts, the name appears almost consistently. And so that's something that we didn't really know about, and nobody seems to have talked about in the literature. There's this book in Hebrew by a guy named Israel Yevon. He doesn't say anything about that. That's the definitive book on this type of topic. So that's pretty cool. So Don, tell us, why is it that you keep looking? Why is it that you spend all day looking, and after you found the first one or the second one, you had 2 witnesses, and you could have walked away? Why'd you keep going to get into the 100 club?
You know, my husband and I were talking about that, and there's several answers I could give, but the most definitive answer I could give is Isaiah 56.
Come on, preach it, sister.
I don't know my identity. I don't know if I'm a daughter of Israel by DNA, but I know that I'm joined to Jehovah through Isaiah 56.
Amen.
And part of that is loving his name. And I love to look for his name. You know, I have a science background. I love doing research. You throw any kind of research at me and I'm all over it. I love doing that. But to do research into the most important thing in the entire universe, the name of the creator, that just, to me, I can't get enough of it.
Amen. All right. Thank you, Don.
All right. Thanks, Nehemiah.
We have once again made contact with T-Bone, who is coming to us somewhere from a nondescript building in North America. Shalom, T-Bone.
Shalom.
T-Bone, we have reached 1,000 manuscripts with the full vowels Jehovah, and you've been a key part of that, and I want to thank you for that. And I want you to share with the people what it's been like looking through these manuscripts for the name of Jehovah with full vowels.
It's been an honor. I feel unworthy to do it, but just something that's been on my heart to do. So,
T-Bone, I want to understand how you had the chutzpah, the temerity, to open up the Bible and look for Jehovah's holy name when you're not a Hebrew scholar, you don't have a degree from some university in Hebrew, and you actually can't even, I mean, you could read the Hebrew letters and the vowels, but you actually can't read Hebrew fluently. So what made you think you could do it?
Well, originally I'm from Missouri, so it's the show.
Wait, in my heart,
state.
I'm from Missouri. What are you talking about? You're from Missouri.
So I wanted to see it for myself, you know.
Yeah, so Missouri's the show me state, and you want to see it for yourself. Okay. So why didn't you go to the scholars and the rabbis and the professors and ask them? Because you were looking at it even before you contacted me.
Well, it's my responsibility to look into things for myself and not believe what anyone else says it.
Thank God someone said it. Hallelujah. This is what I've been telling people for years. Look for yourselves. You can actually see it for yourselves.
Yeah, and you study it, and you can make your own decision about it.
Amen. So you started studying this yourself.
I also prayed that he'd give me the eyes to see his name and to be able to give me the talent to see it and to find it.
Wow. What I love about that, T-Bone, is there's this incredible combination there of audacity on the one hand and humility on the other. You're saying, God, I want to know the answer, and I'm not just going to blindly follow what people tell me, but I'm coming before you in humility and asking you for the wisdom and the discernment to be able to do this.
I guess in a way, a lot of the Textus Receptus King James material is like that. You feel like you're going against all scholarship of the last 200 years. If you go back to the Reformation, you're fine. But you're coming against the Mark Wards who are pushing Logos Bible software. You're coming against the Bart Ehrmans. You're coming against the James Whites. You know, the people who are revered as the gurus of this generation, the Dan Wallaces. You're coming against them and coming against the academy. And so many times when I approach a topic, I go into it just as a blank slate, and anything's possible. And so I look at all sorts of different alternatives to the mainstream narrative and just question everything, because sometimes the very thing that they're saying is an impossibility. And that's the reason why they're saying it's an impossibility, because it actually writes off their whole premise. And so the whole thing about studying into the falling away of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, when I started studying that, like I was against it. I was like, that's a falling away. You know, why would this be anything to do with the rapture or anything like that? And so the more I studied it, I was like, they're actually saying to stay away from this, and it's the kookiest, strangest thing you've ever heard of, and blah, 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 because they don't want you to discover this. And so the more that I dug into it, the more people were howling at me, but the more I understood it to be truth. I couldn't unsee it anymore. And so I think it's like that with any type of study, even studying into history. It's very fascinating to look at all different alternatives, and even some alternatives that you would think are strange and weird, and it's good to just examine them anyway, whether you're doing it to write them off. But a lot of the time you go down that alley and you're like, hang on, this is where I found this information, you know. And so anyway,
I looked up in my emails. You first contacted me in 2014, and I remember thinking, this guy's a nudnik, which is a Hebrew word. He's kind of like he's pestering me. And, you're asking about this manuscript with vowels, and then we went back and forth over time, and I thought, wow, this guy's actually learning. That's kind of impressive. Like, I'm explaining to him about Revia, Mugrash, and things like that, very technical, complicated things, and he's picking up on it real quick. And, and then when I finally was looking for the manuscripts, and I have it here in my emails, in my records, on February 10th, 2017, I contacted you, and I sent you Oriental 4445 in the British Library, one of the key manuscripts of the Bible, and I asked you to look through it. And I really thought I'm going to hear back from this guy in 2 or 3 years, because it's a long manuscript. February 12th, 2 days later, you wrote me back, and you'd found a bunch of places where you thought there might be the name with the full vowels, and I checked them, and 2 of them were legit. And that was manuscript number 6. And really, over the last few months, I've been thinking, we went from 6 manuscripts, and we were in like the 700s. And I'm thinking, what if we got to 1,000 within 1 year? And then by January 21st, 2018, less than a year from the day where we found the 6th one, we now have, as of today, I'm looking at the spreadsheet right now, 1,015 manuscripts with the full vowels, T-Bone.
Wow.
It's impressive.
Amazing.
So share with the people some of the things you do. How is it that you go through a 900-page manuscript and find the vowels in 1 or 2 places, or maybe not at all? Share what the process is, first of all.
Well, I just get comfortable and put on some music and just scan through the pages, usually.
And so you're reading all of the biblical texts as you're going?
No, I just scan for the pattern of the name, and I do it column by column. I have a monitor set up on its end, so that helps me scan quicker.
Wait, I didn't know this. You have a monitor turned 90 degrees? so that it's That's
so
awesome.
Long ways, so the page fits better.
That's awesome. I didn't know you did that. That's incredible. I need to do that now. All right, that's brilliant. I've actually seen people do that who work on manuscripts, but I never did that. That's pretty cool. So why did you first contact me in 2014? It was about these manuscripts.
Well, it's a kind of a long story, but short version is I saw your Open Door series. I think you did that with Keith, and you were talking about the name. And after that, I started looking through the Aleppo Codex myself, and I made a spreadsheet and began looking for the name for myself, because I wanted to find it and see it with my own eyes. So I started making a spreadsheet and taking screenshots of every time I found a name where I thought it was the full vowels. And it turns out they had accents and stuff, but at that time I didn't know anything about the accents.
And what's interesting is that when Keith and I looked at the Leningrad Codex years ago, it's been computerized. And so we were looking on the computer version, meaning like people typed it in. And then we were comparing it with the manuscripts. And we had gotten a certain count of how many instances had the full vowels from the computer version. And then when we actually looked at the manuscript, I said, wait a minute, that's a Revia. That's not a Cholam. So, here you are, not an expert in Hebrew by any means. And the top experts in the world made that same sort of mistake. And what's amazing to me now, T-Bone, I'm going to tell people something. You're not Jewish, am I right, T-Bone?
Correct.
And you're coming from a belief in the New Testament background, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So when you're looking at the Hebrew text, do you understand what you're reading?
A few words here and there, but mostly no.
So you don't even understand the text, but you can identify the name of our Heavenly Father. And what blows my mind is you have looked at more manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible than the top experts in the world. And that's literally true today. I mean, how many manuscripts do you...
But doesn't that show you the deplorable state of the academies in the world? Like even the Hebrew Academy, surely you would think that there are people who are just poring over these manuscripts daily, going through things, asking questions. But a lot of the time people are like, no, well, that's been solved. Back in 1850, someone came up with this idea, and so you have to believe that, and if you question that, you're an idiot. And so all these guys are doing is thinking outside of the box. And this is what I find. Most people haven't done the research into a lot of the New Testament, a lot of the Old Testament. And so oftentimes I'll just get into a Facebook argument and I'll start just putting information onto my website. It might be just pick a verse, just a random verse, like 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 9. I don't even know what that is, but just say they're talking about that. And so I'll just grab a few screenshots of Erasmus and, Stephanus and Beza and look at some annotations and read some commentary and just start building a bit of a database for the arguments that I'm going to bring forward on my website. And after maybe 3 or 4 days of just doing that, I realized that my website is the definitive website in the world for that verse. So that just shows you how little is being done. Now, I'm not saying that means that there hasn't been a whole bunch of work done on those verses. Many times you keep digging and you find books and you'll find things, but it's just not readily available. If you do a Google search, I'm coming up first. I'm looking at the first 100 websites, and no one's speaking about this. And I'm talking about speaking about it today. Oftentimes you'll find people in the Reformation period, they were talking about these things just very normally and bringing up material. And oftentimes just it wasn't such a huge big deal that you had to do reams and reams and reams of study. But unfortunately today, because we're redigging things and there's so much sand being put into these wells that we have to dig all the sand out first, and then we've hit water, but it's a lot of work, and you have to go through all this rigmarole just to get to a normal standard, bog standard position that was well accepted in the Reformation period that most scholars wouldn't even think twice about. So we have to dig, even just for the name of God, Jehovah, digging all the Yahweh sand out of the well, and then So, finally, we got to the real name. It's Jehovah. Yeah, it's just like these other guys were saying back then. And they just pretty much just took it for granted.
You think you've looked through? I'm looking here at our spreadsheet. You personally have found the full vowels in over 700 Bible manuscripts. You're part of a club of 3 people. I call it the 100 Club. It's you, Don, and me. So you found it in over 700 manuscripts, which means to get those 700 manuscripts, how many thousands of manuscripts did you look through? Because most of them you didn't find it, right? So do you have any idea how many manuscripts you've looked through?
Not offhand. The average is about maybe 28%.
Yeah, right. And so you're actually, and I was just looking at Dawn's stats, your find rate is much higher than hers. And look, that could just be a random consequence of the type of manuscripts you're looking at, right? Meaning like there's manuscripts from the Cairo Geniza, and a lot of the manuscripts you're looking at were from a particular library. I know one of those caches of manuscripts that you looked through was 2,700 manuscripts, I can tell you. And that's not the only one you've looked at. So if we're really conservative, you've looked through 3,000 to 4,000 manuscripts. That is more than the top experts in the world, I can tell you that. That's pretty impressive. I mean, look, you obviously have this passion for our Heavenly Father's holy name. What's the most interesting thing you've seen in the manuscripts?
I think one of the most interesting things is the what we call the B-52 bomber.
Come on.
It's
Talk about
Russian National Library B-52. It has the full name with all the vowels and the Rafe over the hey, the last hey.
That's right.
And we found prefixes, full vowels.
Right. The inseparable prepositions. And technically they're inseparable particles, but close enough because it includes things that aren't prepositions. So we've got these inseparable particles, and we originally found this in B-52. And how many of those have we found altogether today?
I have around 107, so it looks like about 143 total that we have right now.
Guys, he found 107. I only found 36. All right, that's okay. I'm so blessed. I mean, it's incredible that you're looking through, like you said, a 900-page manuscript, and you might not find the full vowels at all. And then sometimes you do find it. So, I mean, one of the ones that was really impressive to me, like I said, was that first one, Oriental 4445, where you're going through hundreds and hundreds of pages, and there's only 2 instances where it has the full vowels, at least that we found it. I mean, wow. That's amazing. Amazing. I got to tell you, one of my dreams in life, literally one of my bucket list dreams of life, was to be able to go through the entire Aleppo Codex and see everywhere precisely where it does or does not have the full vowels. And Jehovah has blessed me with you, that with your help, we've now done that. And we accomplished that. And we can say with confidence today that there are at the very least 7 instances with the full vowels, possibly a few more, but 7 certain definitive instances with the full vowels in the Aleppo Codex. And that's a really big deal. That's extremely important. This is a blessing to the world. I want to thank you for that, T-Bone. T-Bone, anything you want to share with the people?
Yeah, one other item that I really remember was the first time I saw Zephaniah 3:9 with the full vowels.
Yes.
That really hit me. And also Exodus 34:6.
That's right.
That whole with the full vowels. So I think that was the David Sassoon Damascus Crown manuscript.
Yeah, that was the first one we found it with full vowels. But I remember early on you had this passion. You said, let's look specifically at Exodus 34 and see if we can find other manuscripts that have it with the full vowels. And we did. We found other ones.
Yeah, that was profound to me, those verses, and then finding the full vowels. And why don't you read it in Hebrew first?
I will read it in Hebrew. Okay, that's a good idea. Exodus 34:6-7. I'm going to read both verses because this is one of the key passages in the Bible. This is the revelation where God reveals what we call in Hebrew the midot, his attributes. We never see God's face. We never see his body, but we are told his attributes. It says, Vaya'avor Yehovah al panav, and Yehovah passed over his face. Vayikra, and he called out. So now Yehovah is calling out to Moses, defining himself. What's the first 2 words when he defines himself? Yehovah, Yehovah.
Yehovah.
There it is. El Rachum Bechanum, a God merciful and gracious. El Chapayim V'Rav Chesed Ve'emet, long-suffering and full of grace and truth. Notzer Chesed La'arafim, he who observes grace for the 1000th generation. Wow, it's just so beautiful. Noseh Avon V'Fesha V'Chata'ah, He's the one who bears iniquity. It says forgive, but literally it's bear. He carries it on his back. He carries it on his back. He bears iniquity, transgression, and sin. This is how Jehovah describes himself to Moses. Wow, it's a powerful verse. It's a powerful verse. And so here we have Jehovah 3 times, and it was your passion to find manuscripts that have it. Now we've got it, originally the goal was to get number 6, and then it was to get 10, and then it was to get 50. And then it was to get, I remember saying to you when we first met in Israel, you came over to Israel to work on these manuscripts with me. I remember saying to you, I wonder if we could get to 200 by the end of the year. Amazing. Now, can you say something about the Hebrew New Testament manuscripts? Because people don't know that.
Okay, we've got a question from Jesus Protects. I have a question. Can anyone know how to pronounce a word from a dead ancient language? Well, I guess the thing is, like, Hebrew has never really become a dead language, because we see the Masoretes, they've used the language. Now, it might have morphed into different types of Hebrew in different areas. And so, we look at things like Yiddish. It's just got a European Germanic language with Hebrew influence. But what we see is it's been a written language for many years. The Talmud, the Kabbalah, Mishnah, the writings of the post temple era, where in Babylon and in Spain and other places where Jews congregated. And so we do see that as a literary language, it was very well copied. And so no doubt people would have spoken this language and learnt this language. Now, we understand that modern day Hebrew is almost like a reconstructed language. But we do see that Jewish communities throughout Europe were speaking a type of Hebrew. The Masoretics were speaking a type of Hebrew. Someone like Ruckman, he might have popularized the Hebrew language in Europe, but it doesn't mean that it was a completely dead language. And so, but just say it had died out. I mean, oftentimes they'll say like Latin is a dead language, but you can still see in the Vatican that's the official language. So it hasn't actually died out completely. But you can reconstruct these. And so one thing that really helps is a lot of literature, poetry, but especially things like names. So you have the names of places which can be transliterated into other languages. And what you'll find is the Hebrew name Jehovah is in the theophoric names of many of the Israelites. And so you'll see Jehoshaphat, Jehoiakim, Jehonanan, Jehoshua, these type of things. So the theophoric names point to the name of Jehovah and how it's pronounced. And so this helps as well. But yeah, very good question. And I guess in a way it would be good to see how Hebrew was maintained through from the temple being destroyed in 70 AD up until today. And because it is a popular notion that Hebrew sort of died out. But when you look at the amount of manuscripts that were being written, even the Masoretes and what they were doing, that they had to have known the Hebrew language to do what they were doing. So anyway, hopefully that helps a little bit.
But I'm there in Israel working on the name Jehovah in the Tanakh, and you're kind of giving me a little jab in the side saying, let's look at some New Testament stuff. So we ended up pulling all these New Testament manuscripts in Hebrew. That's one of the next things we're going to be working on. I'm really excited about that, studying these manuscripts of the New Testament in Hebrew. So I'm actually have you on now live.
So I think it's very interesting to look at the New Testament Hebrew, especially in the book of Revelation, where I've been doing a lot of my research. Now, that's my point exactly, that there were Jewish scribes. And so when they saw the one which art and wast and shall be, that this is the name of I am, it's the name of Jehovah. So they saw that it was a sacred name, and so they put holy over the part that says asomenos, or shall be, to warn people that this is a sacred name. And so when you understand how the Jews were dealing with the Old Testament manuscripts, and how they were dealing with the name of Jehovah back in their day, and how foreign language translations were writing the name of Jehovah and the name of I am, you can see that this is this is probably the most contracted and expanded and changed word in the entire Bible. That there's been so much controversy over this name that you would naturally, if someone knew that type of information, when they come to something like Revelation 16:5, you would normally naturally assume what I'm saying. I mean, most people have no idea about the Old Testament, the name of Jehovah, how it's been translated, how it's been transliterated, how it's been condensed, the theophoric names, how they've been condensed from Jehoshaphat to Josaphat, and how that was the first type of nomina sacra. The sacred names in the Bible. And so a lot of people have no idea about all this, and then they come to Revelation 16:5 and they just want to talk about the Ethiopic or whatever, and it's like you've really got to have this type of I guess a presupposition. It's not even I would say this type of homework has to be done first, then you come to the text. So this is the thing, I've known that the name of God is Jehovah since like 2001, and thought about it, written about it, argued it on Facebook, and Facebook, it's only been around for since 2010 or something, but talked about it, read articles on it, and oftentimes bringing this type of thing up. And so then when I look at Revelation 16:5, it's like, that fits here, that fits there, where someone who doesn't have that type of background wouldn't see that. And so someone like Nehemiah Gordon, I'm pretty sure if he was sitting next to me and I explained my position, he would get it instantly. Where this is where I feel I'm not dissing TurretinFan or his scholarship at all, but I just feel that he came to that with more of a critical text mindset and not really understanding these things. And because he's done 22 videos or whatever, I can go back through them and say, look, he doesn't know or understand what I'm saying when it's related to Haya or Hava, when it's related to to be the existence, when it's related to I am. It's like he doesn't understand that, and he's learning that inadvertently sort of through me, but always defaulting to the negative. And so that's where I would encourage him even just to go through this material, just to go through the Wikipedia material just on the name of Jehovah itself, and just look at all the arguments for and against, and then go, okay, now I see it. And then he's got a good foundation with which to work on. So Jesus Protects says, I understand, thank you. No worries. Hudson is in the house, and he says, have you heard of Dr. Gaza? He has found many Hebrew New Testament manuscripts. I haven't heard of him. Is he the one who does a lot of the Syriac manuscripts? I'm pretty sure. I follow a guy on Facebook, and he puts up a lot of Syriac stuff. Sometimes it's old material, sometimes it's like only written like 2 centuries ago, but it's just that fascinating stuff. But it's really, really cool. And one of the things that it really amazes me is that the script of Urdu, because I lived in Pakistan for a year, and my wife can read Arabic, and she looks at, like, sometimes I'll be looking at an Arabic script, like in the London Polyglot of 1657. I'm looking at an Arabic script, and I'm like, I'm like, baby, can you show me what this means? And she'll come in and say, oh, yeah, well, that means God there. That means book. That means that, she just can read through it. And I'm like, she can read the Arabic. I'm like for me to be able to read Hebrew and Arabic and these Semitic languages is just like, it's a skill that, I'm often there just thinking, I'm getting older. I probably won't ever achieve these things in my life. And I'm like, well, I'll just have to have children and teach them when they're young and all this sort of stuff. But it's just something that if I could, trade or buy, a download of something, imagine if you could, just put in a little smart card into your brain. I would definitely go Semitic languages. And I would want to know Hebrew. I want to know Greek fluently as well. But I guess some people learn these languages like in a couple of years, and they say some people like 60 they learn a language, and they're like, wow, I learned it, and I'm so glad that I did. Now I'm fluent in it. But anyway, I'm sort of blabbling on. But yeah, Dr. I might look him up. Dr. Al-Gaza. Okay. I did see a Wikipedia page come up first, but then it disappeared. Wikipedia, yeah, there we go. It was in the search. Oh, he's not on Wikipedia. Maybe that's why people are searching for that. Okay, so let's look at academia. Okay, so that's him there. A Hebrew Institute, Black Belt Theology, Linguistic Context of the Hebrew Bible. Okay, that's interesting, yeah. Jesus is Lord, Finding the Nomina Sacra. Looks like very interesting material. I don't think that's the same guy as I'm following. But it looks very interesting. Okay. Yeah, it seems like he's going through a lot of the material looking for Jesus is Lord. I'm pretty sure if he's dealing with 1 Corinthians chapter 12, I think it was, that's a good verse to come against the Jehovah's Witnesses, because they want to say Jesus is Jehovah there. Anyway, it looks very interesting. So I'll leave that open. I'll put it over here, and I'll check that out later. So let's just continue.
I actually just sent you a document of the New Testament. I've known about this document for many years, but only recently did we finally get this image in color, and I've sent it to you, and you're looking at it now for the first time. Am I right?
Correct.
Okay. And what do you see there, T-Bone, in this Hebrew text of the New Testament, which, look, we don't know if this is a Hebrew original or a translation from Greek, because it really is of unknown origin, but it was found in a library. I mean, it's so cool. There was a box on a shelf, and it had all these loose pages from dozens of different books. And among those pages were 4 pages of the New Testament in Hebrew. And what do you see there in this Hebrew New Testament, T-Bone?
Well, the first word I see is Jehovah. And then on the second line, it says Jehovah.
And is it with the full vowels?
Correct.
Hallelujah. All right, T-Bone, thank you very much. Shalom.
Shalom.
I'm on with Chris Clark, who is in Virginia. Shalom, Chris.
Shalom, Nehemiah.
Chris, I'm so excited. We've reached 1,000 manuscripts with the full vowels Jehovah, and you've been a part of this. Can you share with the people what it's been like looking through these Hebrew manuscripts for the name?
It's been pretty exciting. In 2011, I went to the conferences where you and Keith were teaching on the name with the first 3 manuscripts, Aleppo Codex, Leningrad Codex, Cairo Codex.
That's what eventually became the Open Door series, but originally it was a series of conferences, that Michael Root put on.
Right. And that got me interested in the name then, so I started out looking in those manuscripts for the name.
Oh, wow.
And it was interesting to see it in the manuscript for myself. because I'd never learned about the name before.
Right. You know, I was born and raised in Illinois, but deep in my heart, I'm from Missouri, which is the show me state. And that's what I love about this. And I really love that anybody, you don't have to be a Hebrew expert, anybody can open up these manuscripts and see it for themselves.
And that's true, because I can't speak Hebrew, can't read Hebrew, but learning from you how the name is supposed to look, going through the manuscripts, the name just pops out off the page because that's really the only word I know.
Right, right. That's awesome. What I love about that is that you can't read Hebrew, but you can read those 4 letters and you know what those vowels look like, and you, through this process, you've learned what some of the accents look like, so because it's very easily confused with certain accents. And it's really so simple. It really is a simple language, the Hebrew language. There's only 22 characters, and the number of vowels is limited. And the number of accents as well is limited. So it's doable. Somebody can learn to identify that. And I'm looking at my records here. I see you looked through some of the manuscripts in the British Library and found the full vowels. That's pretty exciting.
Right.
So tell us, why is the name important to you? Because from your name, Chris, I'm guessing you're not of Jewish extraction.
No, I'm not. Over the years, you've been sharing pictures from the first 3, 4, 5 manuscripts you found. And there's always been people that says, well, knowing God's characters is important, but knowing his name really isn't that important. So I decided to look in the Bible and see for myself, was it important or not?
So what verses did you find that support this idea that it's actually important to know not only God's character, but his actual name?
Okay, one is Exodus 9:16.
Yeah.
And in the very deed for this cause have I raised thee up to shew in my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth.
Wow. So this is actually even before they got out of Egypt. He's saying this to Moses. Wow.
So it's quite interesting. When I wrote the book on Revelation 16:5, I wanted some chapter headings. And so what I would do is go through and look at some of these verses where it was saying, I will declare my name forever. My name is the Lord, or, in the Hebrew, my name is Jehovah and Jehovah. And so it's quite interesting. These guys are looking at those same verses. We're all looking at the same text. And what I found was there are a lot of verses that talk about the name of God, even the Lord's Prayer. Like, you think of how many Christians around the world, nominal Christians as well. There's probably like 2 billion all up who claim to be Christians, including Catholics and everyone. But the Lord's Prayer is a huge thing. And it's hallowed be thy name. It's like, well, okay, in the historical context of that, what is the name of God that Jesus is talking about? Well, he would have been talking about the name of Jehovah. Hallowed be your name, the name of the Father. What is that name? Okay, we go back to Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. It talks about the I am. The very next verse talks about Jehovah. And so we see that it is the name of Jehovah. So it's quite amazing. When you go through and look at the name of God and you do a study on this in Scripture, it's one of those almost forgotten topics that I recommend people study into, get into. And this is one of the reasons why when I bring up the Revelation 16:5 material and talk about the name of God, etc., a lot of people have no foundation in this. And so they're not sure, that they're sort of rudderless. And I guess that's why I've put the headings on many of these verses that they're bringing up in the Bible, because, or in the book, sorry, these biblical sayings, because I wanted to remind people that it's not a weird thing that we're talking about. We're talking about the exalting the name of God. In the King James, the name Jehovah does appear. So they knew it was the name Jehovah on the front cover of the King James Bible, not the very front cover, but the front, the first printed material has Jehovah with its full vowels, just like this, right at the top of the King James Bible. And so it's very clear that that's what it has. So anyway.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. What else you got?
Let's see, Isaiah 12:4.
Mm-hmm.
And in that day shall ye say, praise Jehovah, call upon his name, declare his doings among the people, make mention that his name is exalted.
His name is what represents him. This is why the Hebrew Bible makes such a big deal about names. Think about all the namings. This is actually really profound now that we're talking about this. So think about creation. So God creates the animals, but then he brings them to Adam to give them names. And that act of naming the animals is Adam, in a sense, participating in their creation. He's putting these labels on the animals, and then those become the names of the animals. Then when we hear the names of the animals in Hebrew, in the Bible, the animals were allowed to eat, the animals were not allowed to eat. Well, Adam, a human being, created those names. And so names throughout the Bible are these really important things. Sometimes we're not told explicitly, right? Sometimes it's implied why somebody has a name, but other times we're told about Adam and Eve and Seth, but then Hevel, Abel, we're not exactly told the reason, right? Hevel means vanity, right? Because he was murdered, right? He didn't reproduce. He was killed and his blood spilled into the ground at a young age. And so these names, I mean, all the 12 tribes were told the reasons for their names. And then when I'm stating the obvious, but when Jacob wrestles with the angel, he changes his name, and God changes Abraham's name from Avram to Avraham. So names are this important thing in the Bible. To just trivialize and say, well, we don't need to know his name, we just need to know his character, that misses the entire context of the Hebrew culture that the Bible was revealed in.
Right.
Give us some other verses, Chris.
Okay, Psalm 29:2. Give unto Jehovah the glory due unto his name. Worship Jehovah in the beauty of holiness.
Wow. Powerful stuff. All right, so back to your experience of searching through these Hebrew manuscripts. Did anything happen while you're searching through these Hebrew manuscripts? Did you have some experience that you want to share with us?
Well, like I said in the beginning, I was looking through the three, the Aleppo Codex, Leningrad Codex, Cairo Codex, and I was kind of surprised that when I would find the name written in the Bible, the vowels for Adonai were not there. And they were supposed to be, according to what the popular teachings are on the internet.
Oh, you mean, so, what do you mean? It's a fact that those are the vowels other than I. It's right. A fact that happens not to be true, but it's a fact.
But then in recent months, there were some instances of the name with full vowels being found in the manuscript with the eraser dots around the name.
Right.
And then in the margin, the word Adonai was written with the vowels of Adonai.
Right.
So you had both sets of vowels written on the page.
Right. And that's really cool, the juxtaposition there. You see Yud He Vav He, and you see the vowels it has, and then you see Adonai in the margin, essentially replacing it because it was a mistake that they wrote Yud He Vav He. And you can see right there, they're not the same vowels. They're side by side.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the most interesting things recently, is to be able to see them both right there, to know that they're different. And to know the scribe knew they were different.
Yeah. And you know what? He knew how to write the vowels of Adonai. I mean, that's one of the arguments that people have made. Well, they had to revert to a schwa because it's not a guttural letter or the yud. Okay, then why is it we've now found manuscripts that do have the vowels Adonai? It's very rare, but we've now found manuscripts where the scribe said, hey, I actually want to put in the vowels Adonai, and he did it.
Right.
Right? So why didn't he do it in the other manuscripts? Because those aren't the vowels of Adonai.
Exactly.
All right, Chris, thanks for joining us. Shalom.
All right, thanks, Nehemiah. Shalom.
I got Keith Johnson on the line here, coming all the way from Shanghai, China. Ni hao.
Ni hao. You still remember your Chinese, Nehemiah? I'm impressed.
Keith, we've got 1,000 manuscripts with the full vowels of the name Yehovah, and actually, as of right now, at this moment, we have 1,015. And I wanted to get you on the line because you were involved in a process of these manuscripts. I had 2 manuscripts, and I was happy with 2 manuscripts. That was my 2 witnesses. They were the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex, and it didn't even occur to me for years to look for a 3rd manuscript until something happened. I want you to share what that was.
Well, as usual, you got me into some trouble. It was good trouble as it pertains to this topic, I would say, regarding the name. If you remember, some years ago, those 2 manuscripts, which actually you introduced me to, Nehemiah, way back in 2002. And it was funny, one of those manuscripts, the Leningrad manuscript, here I had within the context of my own Bible from seminary. And I brought it to Israel, and you said to me, you looked at my little Hebrew Bible, and you said, within the pages of that Bible, the name appears. And I'm like, what do you mean? I've had this all these years. I didn't even begin to look at it. That led to a wonderful process, Nehemiah, where we got a chance to see with our own 2 eyes, my own 2 eyes, after you introducing it to me, the name written with full vowels in both the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex. So to me, I was like, wow, this is great. So I was invited to do a series on TV for a Christian television station down in Texas. And I told them exactly what I was going to do. And they said, absolutely, bring the witnesses. And so I took the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex and put them on an airplane, Nehemiah.
Those are big books. And that was the Aleppo Codex that Reggie White gave you, right? He gave me one, you one, Kadri Ismail one, and one for himself. Yeah, I still have that too.
I mean, what a gift. So anyway, but the thought was, I was so excited thinking, well, you know what? Rather than talking about these manuscripts and rather than talking about what's in the manuscripts, I'm going to bring these manuscripts and put them on TV and introduce them to the world. Let the world see for themselves.
Wow.
We're not making this up. And then it happened.
What happened? They saw the manuscript and they were convinced, right?
Well, the people that were producing it were really quite impressed. And I did an entire series. I think it was 12 parts or something. And halfway through the series, the issue came up that I was using these two manuscripts and actually showing people these two manuscripts. And there were some people that were involved that said, hey, you must not do that. You cannot do that. They went on and on saying, you can't show the people these things. It will confuse them. That they might think for a minute that maybe the name is not what we proclaimed the name to be. And I mean, the people that are listening, I don't want to bore them too much, but what it really did, and I'll never be able to thank you enough for one of the things that you suggested, Nehemiah. What you suggested, which was really, I think was a game changer, at least for me, was that you said, hey, let's go see if we can find some other evidence. And we went to the library and went and found the Cairo Codex of the Prophets, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
So before you had your experts, T-Bone and Don, I was your little assistant. And if you remember, we went to the library and you handed me one book and you took another book and you sat down and started looking and I started looking. And I would come across what I thought was, hey, Bob, hey, hand it to you. You say, give me the book. And you start looking through. I'll never forget it. I took a picture. And then every single time, like, no, that might be a smudge. And then Nehemiah, oh, man, what a great moment. You were sitting in the library, and there the Cairo Codex was Yud He Vav He with the 3 vowels. So we had the full name in the Cairo Codex of the Prophets.
Well, that was the third witness, the Cairo Codex of the Prophets. And then you found the fourth witness. That was the Damascus crown.
It was Damascus crown. And I have to be honest, here's where I do lose a little bit of my memory. I'm getting older. Yeah. Maybe it's because I'm on the other side of the world, but
you're upside down. You've been standing on your head for all this time.
Upside down. There's blood rushing to my head. And I have to say something, Nehemiah. There's so much that's going on regarding these witnesses in this part of the world that those years ago when we were dealing with this sort of thing, people really have taken that ball and they've run with it. So the Damascus crown, we find the name 4 consonants and 3 vowels. And I remember us discussing that and saying, wow, this is amazing. We now have 100% increase from what we had. We now have 4.
Mm-hmm. So a year and a half ago over the summer, I went to Cincinnati, where they have the Hebrew Union College has a manuscript and one of the key Masoretic manuscripts, and that was number 5.
Okay.
So I probably called you last January, and then I said, I've got 10 rabbis. I need to find 10 Bible manuscripts.
And I'm like, good luck with that. It took us forever to find.
Right. So in 15 years, we had 5 Bible manuscripts, and I want to find 5 more. Talk to you when I'm 70 or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I want to say something about this, Nehemiah. What I really appreciate, and even, I've been tracking along since January, and you've let me get a chance to see what you've been doing and talking to the people that you're talking with. We were in Boston together, Nehemiah, where you went outside of the place, the bounds of comfort, and asked people, scholars, about the process that you've been through. So I've been watching this, witnessing this. When I got the note yesterday that said, we found 1,000, call and let's celebrate, I knew at that point that, this really is a huge deal. I mean, people probably don't appreciate what it means, but they're going to appreciate to see the fruit of the labor that you and your team have put into this to find 1,000 plus witnesses with the 4 consonants and the 3 vowels. And what you've done that's even more important, I want to say this, that I think is even more special, is that you have involved people, the scholars and others, that are well respected, but you've also gone to people and said, hey, do you want to be a part of this process? But to say to Don and to T-Bone, hey, here's what you're looking for, and for them to find it. I think this is so cool. This is amazing. It's like the nations are coming together and they're discovering the witness of the name. And I cannot tell you how exciting it is to watch it, to have been a part of it early, but now to see where you're at now. I don't know if I'll ever catch up. I mean, this is game changing.
Look, you've got to catch up to Dawn. Dawn just joined the 100 Club. She's
my goodness.
Literally, I'm looking at the spreadsheet, the database right now. She has 101 manuscripts that she personally discovered the full vowels in.
Yeah, can you do us a favor? Can you do me? I don't know if you've addressed this, Nehemiah. So of the 1,000 manuscripts, how many do you think you had to look for to find 1,000? Like, is there a percentage?
Yeah, so that's really interesting that you asked that. So Dawn's rate is 15%, and T-Bone's rate, he estimates at 28%.
I have no idea what my rate is. I don't know, but 1 in 4 sounds about right in mine. And that might just be a function of, we had Dawn look through this one particular set of manuscripts, the Lewis Gibson collection, and there it might just be 15%, right? I mean, you know, she found all the ones that were there. I don't think she missed any. She did a very thorough job there. So let's say roughly 1 in 5, right? That means you're looking at 4 manuscripts that don't have it in order to get one on average that does have it.
That is absolutely amazing. And so, time-wise, why so much effort, Nehemiah?
It's really interesting you say that. I was in San Antonio with Deb and her husband. We had printed out every page of the Aleppo Codex, and we were organizing them for another project I'm working on, which is to get precise, 100% accurate statistics on the name in the Aleppo Codex. So like right now, I can tell you the name appears 7 times with the full vowels. What I can't tell you is how many times it appears without the full vowels. I can tell you that number is approximately 4,300. I'm not satisfied with approximately. I want to know the exact number. So we're sitting there and we're going through this manuscript, the Aleppo Codex, printed out, and we're organizing the pages and we're looking through. And I turned to Deb's husband. I said, I wonder the detractors, how many manuscripts are they sitting and doing this work for? I mean, it's a lot of work. I don't know if people appreciate that. It really is a lot of legwork. I mean, I will on a regular basis be shooting emails back and forth with T-Bone at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and he's responding because we're both up working on this. And why am I working on it? I can't sleep. As you were the one who said it. Would you tell the people what you said when I told you about this?
I said you were. I told them you. I said you were under arrest by the Spirit.
You said I'm arrested. Yeah, arrested by the Spirit, right?
Yeah,
under arrest.
Something like that, and it's regarding something that's biblical like this. I mean, it certainly has happened to me in the past, and it seems to me that that's definitely what's happening to you. I mean, think about it. What you're working on is helping. Can I say a prophecy come to pass? That people would know the name. And that people would understand his name and that they would proclaim his name. And here you're working on this project. And Nehemiah, there's just no way when you called in January and you said you're looking for 10, that there was no thought that you would ever get to 100. And then when you got to 100, I'm like, well, 500, 1,000. I mean, at this point, you know, whatever the number is, it's just overwhelming. But the point is that you've been diligent with this, and now we're seeing the fruit of the labor.
Mm-hmm. And Keith, the best way I can explain of what this is like is something that you actually quoted this verse in your book, His Hallowed Name Revealed Again. It's Jeremiah 20, verse 9. Then I said, I will not make mention of him, nor speak any more in his name, but his word was in my heart like a burning fire, shut up in my bones. I was weary of holding it back, and I could not. It's Jeremiah. This is what I feel like. They told me literally, don't speak that name anymore. I've literally been told that. Would you please stop speaking this name? And it's Jeremiah. I can't. I could not. And I can't do it. I'm not able. This is what keeps me up until 3 and 4 in the morning, searching through these manuscripts. 1 manuscript, 2 manuscript, 3, 4, and there's no name. And then I get to number 5. I can't. And then it's like, okay, well, now I'm going for another hour.
Well, Nehemiah, can I just ask you a question? And I think this is a question for the people who don't even maybe understand the significance of this. So you've been a person from the time I met you that always said, hey, listen, we got to find the sources. You got to see it for yourself with your own 2 eyes. So of all those manuscripts that you guys have been looking through, what's been the percentage of you finding the name Yahweh in the manuscripts?
0. Have never found the name Yahweh. There's actually.
How's that? And so if you want to, like, say, for example, a lot of the material that I've been going through with Revelation 16:5, and it's been like, well, what about the manuscript evidence for this? And what about the manuscript evidence for that? And, you know, so I'm the first to say, well, you know, Theodore Beza had a manuscript. And in a sense where, you know, TurretinFan gets me on a technicality there and goes, we don't know if he, or what he actually says is, he didn't have a manuscript, Nick. And it's like, well, we don't know if he had it or not, but you wouldn't say that, Westcott and Hort had the Vaticanus manuscript. You would expect that it's the same reading, you know what I mean? But apparently, if Beza had a manuscript, it's probably the wrong reading. It probably goes through Henry Stephanus, and he did a bad compilation of manuscripts and all the rest of it. And so It's just every step of the way is just, nothing. Yeah, if Theodore Beza woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, oh, you woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's like, no, it was 7:59. It's like, oh, okay, so you can't freely just talk about these things oftentimes. Now, I'm glad that TurretinFan went through my material, but and I'm glad that he was pulling me up on certain things, because sometimes I was saying things like, say, Henry Stephanus's brother wrote the book on the Ethiopic, but it's like, okay, well, he printed a book on the Ethiopic. It's like, okay, it's like, but when in the heat of the moment, you just say these things. But I don't know if he thinks I'm being disingenuous there, but I'm definitely not. I'm just sort of like, okay, well, he's the one who, he would have proofread it. He would have known all about it. You know what I mean? He printed the thing. He had to put all the little things in backwards from the uppercase and lowercase letters and all the Ethiopic letters. May as well have written the book. But at the end of the day, it's all like manuscript evidence. And even the stuff that we've shown, it's like just totally discredited. And no, we don't have it today, so it never existed, and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, how about some manuscript evidence for Yahweh? Oh, well, that's a totally different topic, and that's not, it's like, here is a guy looking for this. How many? And they do a drum roll. 0. So if anyone from the critical text camp wants to say, hey, the name is Yahweh, it's like, okay, so how much manuscript evidence do you have for this name? Drum roll, 0. So, but the thing is, they go, oh, well, we look at internal evidence and we look at this and that. How come they can look at internal evidence and this and that when we can't? You know what I mean? And if someone said that they had, like if Westcott and Hort said, oh, look, we did have a manuscript that had this, but we don't have it today, we would go, well, they probably did have a we're not the ones making up conspiracy theories here about what happened to this and someone lied, or maybe he slipped on the banana peel and went for a ride and, just hit his head and then thought that he had a manuscript and all this sort of rubbish. It's like, no, Jan Kranz is coming out with all these stories of, Beza, tricked himself. He thought he had a manuscript, but he didn't, and all this sort of rubbish. Well, let's look at Yahweh. All these guys would say Yahweh is the name of God. Drum roll, no evidence for that name. Drum roll, it's popularized by Decenius, who retracted it. And it just, you guys have got to get over this Yahweh thing. And it's like the whole Easter is pagan thing. When I first started saying it, there was hardly anyone was saying that Easter was not a pagan festival. And I used to jump into chat rooms, and it was like 90% of people would just jump on me like hornets protecting their hive. But now it's like people like Mark Ward saying it. Like everyone's pretty much saying, even that there's a YouTube channel that I'm subscribed to, which is done by atheists. And what they do is they sort of discredit stupid atheist arguments. A bit like, creationists might say, look, don't use the amount of moon dust in the footprint to talk about how old the moon is or whatever. Don't use these arguments. They're really bad. And so atheists do that as well to themselves. And they talk about how, some atheists say the daftest things. And that was one of them that they were talking about, that whole concept. And so anyway, let's continue. Yeah, sorry. I should really tidy that up. The whole thing about Easter being a pagan festival was one of the things they were saying, don't use that argument anymore. It's not a pagan festival. It's been thoroughly debunked. And I think that I was one of the main people who thoroughly debunked that. And not because it was my idea, but I just popularized it. I was every Easter on the internet, I'm just almost copying, pasting, getting to the point where I'm like, am I going to get blocked for spamming? Like every argument that I saw, Easter's pagan, I'm putting my links up there.
Actually, one variant that we found, Keith, and we found it now, and actually it was Dawn. She found it in 2 manuscripts, and we did find a variant set of manuscripts. Instead of Shvach Olam Kamatz, which is pronounced Yehovah, we found in 2 manuscripts, one time in each, Shvach Olam Patach, which is pronounced Yehovah. And that's actually in a set of manuscripts where they routinely switch back and forth between patach and kamatz, because presumably in that area where they were copying as manuscripts, they pronounced the two the same, the way we do in modern Hebrew as well.
Well, let me tell you why I asked the question. I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus regarding a pronunciation of Yahweh. The point is, one of the challenges that we've brought forward to people over and over again is, please, you've got this other pronunciation. Can you find a witness, written witness, Hebrew manuscript witness? And unless you can tell me different, that challenge has not yet been met, other than for you to be able to look for the full pronunciation of the name. I mean, and so my point is that you're not finding manuscripts that say, well, here's the name, Yahuwah, or, and again, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to downplay the people that see it that way, but as it pertains to why this is so significant, this is not your opinion. This is manuscript evidence. Now, from 5 to 100 to 1,000, that to me is a game changer. And I would like for people to know the significance of that you're talking about something that's actually seen, that was actually written, that have ancient sources.
And really, for me, Keith, this goes back to my initial prayer. This was a prayer in the late 90s that I had. My prayer was, I'd read all these different theories and opinions and journal articles, and I'm talking about from serious scholars, about how the name is to be pronounced. And, and I read about Yahweh, which is, scholarly guess, and it's based on these Greek sources, and there's something else in other things in Greek sources. And my prayer was, Father, I want to be able to call on your name and point to the evidence for that name in the Hebrew manuscripts by the scribes who preserved your word. I don't want this to be, because if it's an opinion, today I can have opinion A and tomorrow I can have opinion B, and then the next week I'll have opinions. Your opinion can change. Facts are facts. And so my prayer was, for a number of years, my prayer was, Father, I want to be able to call on your name, not based on any man's opinion, but based on the evidence in your Bible. And that's why it's so significant to me. That's why it was significant for me when I found the first two manuscripts in 2001, and when we found the Cairo Codex of the Prophets. That wasn't your opinion. It wasn't my opinion. There it was. I can point it. And this was literally my prayer. On the day of judgment, if you ask me, why did you call me by that name? I can point to the book, to the word of God, and say, your name was written that way in your word. And that was my prayer. And that's what this is the culmination of, these 1,015 manuscripts. But we're not done, Keith. We're going to keep going. And I'm really excited. We've got some really cool things on the horizon.
It's funny. He's just ringing through, talking to people who are working on the project. And he's like, we got 1,000. And then it's like, we got 1,010. We got 1,015. And so they just keep popping up. And I think now he's just into, I'm not sure. I think it might be up to 2,000.
And I hope you're going to be a part of that. One of the things that I just sent this live on the air, recorded live, to T-Bone, was a manuscript of the New Testament. We're not saying where it's from. And I asked him, T-Bone, you've never seen this manuscript before. What do you see? And the first word on the page was Jehovah. And what I really want to do is share that manuscript with the people, because it really is an exciting story. And I want you to be involved in that process. I think you've been a very important piece of the puzzle. You bring something to the game, and I want you to be part of that.
Well, I got to go circle back to the beginning of this interview, Nehemiah, that you asked the question about what happened that took us beyond the two, and it was controversy, and that controversy really ended up being a place of blessing. Now, I will say something. You invited me about a couple months ago. We were in Boston together at the International Society of Biblical Literature, and I have to tell you something. It kind of happened again, and now I feel that fire again that's burning about the need to really help bring clarity for people. And I think what you're doing, honestly, by what you're doing, I just think it's bringing to the forefront again something that's just not going to go away. Am I right or wrong? Prophetically, it's going to come. There's going to come a time when he's going to cause his name to be known. And is it possible? Here I am, 7,000 miles away. We're having this conversation. You'll send this out to people. Is it just possible that we could be a part of that process of his name coming forth in the nations? And I'll tell you something, even over here, Nehemiah.
Can I read the verse? Isaiah 52, verse 6. Therefore my people shall know my name. Therefore they shall know in that day that I am he who speaks it. Behold, it is I.
And I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know how much we've talked about this, but even in this part of the world, they're beginning to have not only an appreciation, but a practice of proclaiming his name. We're finding people all over the world, as you know, that you talk to and interact with. But I just have to say, there's even more people who want to understand this information. So I hope, yes, I will be willing to do anything as it pertains to this. And maybe that will throw some water on the fire that's burning in my bones. Everything I think will kind of calm down. You do something like this. And I got to tell you, Nehemiah, you've started a bonfire.
Keith, would you end in prayer?
Absolutely, I would. I would be honored. And Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity to put our hands to this plow. I thank you for Nehemiah's work. I thank you for the work of those that he's with.
Yeah, the reason that I'm not talking that much over this, because it speaks for itself. I mean, what more can I add to that? And so it's nearly finished here, and then we're going to go to another clip.
T-Bone and Don and everyone that has been a part of this process, the many scholars that our eyes have been opened as a result of this research that Nehemiah is doing, and pray that it will continue. And Father, I just ask right now that even as we think about what the future is, we know one thing for sure, and that is that your name will be proclaimed. As you said in this Exodus chapter 9, this says, but indeed, for this reason I have allowed you to remain, in order to show you my power, in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. Father, while we're here on this earth, let us be their instruments of proclaiming your name and sending forth the wonderful blessing of running into your name and understanding it in a way that would just be powerful, and it would be amazing, and that people all over the world would begin to do that which you say in the last days will take place, that your name shall be proclaimed. And it is in your name, Jehovah, that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemiah Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemiah's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiahswall.com.
Hello, my name is Nehemiah Gordon, and I am here at Joshua's altar at Mount Ebal as an ambassador of the name as part of the Proclaim the Name campaign. And I am so excited to be here to proclaim the name of the creator of the universe, because this is the altar that's mentioned twice in the Torah. God commands the Israelites to build it as soon as they get into the land. And when Joshua actually comes into the land in this 8th chapter of the book of Joshua, he builds this altar that was uncovered by Israeli archaeologists in the 1980s. And there's really no other place I can think of that would be as exciting to proclaim the name, because it says in the Torah, when people would build altars, it says Abraham would build an altar, and it says he would call upon the name, and other people would build altars and they would call upon the name. So what an exciting thing for me to do here, to call upon the name of the creator of the universe. I proclaim here the name Jehovah. Jehovah Hua Elohim. Jehovah, he is God. Find out how you can become an ambassador of the name at hishallowedname.com.
Jehovah Avinu, Jehovah our Father, Jehovah Boreh, Jehovah who creates, Jehovah his king, Jehovah my strength, Jehovah Eli, Jehovah my El, Jehovah Elohei Tzabaot, Jehovah Elohim of hosts, Jehovah El Olam, Jehovah El Everlasting, Jehovah Elyon, Jehovah Most High, Jehovah Gibor Milchama, Jehovah Mighty in Battle, Jehovah Hashofet, Jehovah the Judge, Jehovah Ish Milchama, Jehovah Man of Battle. Here we are on January 1st, the Gregorian year. I'm in New York City by the oldest pagan symbol in all of North America. This is actually an Egyptian obelisk that was brought over from Egypt 3,000 years ago. And maybe I shouldn't make such a big deal about it, but I think it's a great place to start what I call the Proclaim the Name campaign. This obelisk is calling upon the name of Ra and his son Horus, this son of sons they call him. But what I want to do is I want to come to New York City and start this campaign, this international campaign. Go to www.hishallowedname.com, go to the Ambassador's Embassy, sign up to become an ambassador of the name. I am an ambassador of the name. I have ambassadors all over the world, and we're going to start this campaign right here. I declared today that Jehovah Huha Elohim, Jehovah is God and there is no other. I'm here in New York City on this beautiful day in Central Park with my son. I'm going to proclaim his name, Jehovah, call upon him, and blow the show. Jehovah Hu Ha-Elohim.
Amen.
So here's an image from Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. And if you could read medieval Hebrew, you can read this. It's an unusual script if you're not familiar with it. But right over here, you have this symbol, which is the symbol He, and it appears twice. And this He, over here and over here, what this represents is the name Hashem.
Shalom, Torah fans. Since January of 2017, I received several calls from Nehemiah Gordon, who was breaking new ground in biblical research that I felt needed to get out to the world. And so before he left for Israel, he and I got together for Shabbat Night Live to pre-record a series which we released this last fall, and the Gentiles shall know my name. I didn't get to watch this series until it actually aired on television. And at the end of this series, I was so moved by this, I wanted to call Nehemiah immediately and say, Nehemiah, I need an update. When can you come and spend some time? Just come and relax and be here in Charlotte. And he said, I'm busy. I'm on some projects right now that I can't leave at this point. And so just a couple of weeks ago, he gave me a call, which I will never forget, because what happened during this last year and what he had been working on for the last several months has really been a historic event in the history of Bible research. And things that have not been known for over 1,000 years have now come to light. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have Nehemiah Gordon back with us. Nehemiah, good to have you here, finally, at last.
It's great to be here. Great to be back. Yeah, it really was exciting when I called you up. And what had happened is we started about a year ago looking for more Bible manuscripts with the full vowels of the name Jehovah. We started out, in 2001, I had 2 Bible manuscripts. And then over the years, I found a 3rd and a 4th and a 5th. And so in a period of about 15 years, I knew about 5 Bible manuscripts with the vowels Jehovah.
Okay, now there are a lot of people, I believe it's hundreds of thousands that have joined us since the episodes have aired.
Yeah.
And so let's go back and capture some of these things, because there were things that you laid out in the last series that I think we need to revisit, but the significance of this as far as the vowels in the name. Can you give us a little background?
Right,
on
so
that?
in most of the Bible manuscripts, or what we've been told for 200 years, is that God's name is Yahweh. And the Jews forgot how to pronounce the name, and these Christians rediscovered this pronunciation Yahweh, or I should say they invented really this pronunciation Yahweh about 200 years ago. And when I was studying this many, many years ago, I said, there's this theory of Yahweh, and I looked up in the Anchor Bible Dictionary, which is really a respected source, and it said Yahweh is a scholarly guess. And I said, guess? Surely we should be able to do better than that. And I started to pick apart, and what are the sources? How do we really know it's Yahweh? And I saw there really was nothing in any Jewish or Hebrew source that supported that. And so I started to look for sources that would be Jewish sources. And I really, didn't even know where to go, and kind of stumbled upon some things while I was at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem working on my master's degree. And should I tell this story? It's what I've shared before.
I think you need to, because why this name is significant. It appears how many times in the Hebrew?
The name appears 6,827 times in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. That means Yud He Vav He, God's holy name, appears more than Lord, God, which is Adonai, Elohim, El Shaddai, El Elyon. Beautiful titles, right? But if you combine all of those together, they don't even come out to half of the actual personal name of God. And in Exodus 3:15, he says, "This is my name forever." This is, it's usually translated, "This is my memorial for generation to generation," like some memorial plaque and he's dead or something. But if you look at the Hebrew, it actually means "this is my mention for generation to generation." So this is what we're supposed to call him, by his name Yud He Vav He, revealed in Exodus 3:15. And the problem was, for the last 200 years, scholars said, we really don't know what the name is. And let me back up. Jews have this tradition of not speaking the name.
Okay, that's where it started.
That's where it
they
starts.
don't speak it.
Right?
And
Jews don't speak it. I grew up that whenever you see those 4 letters, 6,827 times in your Bible, thousands of times in the prayer books and other things, you're always to read them as Adonai. Adonai means Lord. This is a tradition that goes back at least 1,800 years. Some people claim longer. And because of that, it was assumed that Jews don't know what the pronunciation is. My prayer, so we were told these are the vowels of Adonai. Well, I started studying Hebrew manuscripts. My prayer was to know what is your name based on Hebrew Jewish sources, that on the day of judgment, I could point to that source. If God says to me, Nehemiah, you mispronounced my name. Why did you do that? I'll be able to say, Father in heaven, who I'm standing before right now on the day of judgment, this is how it was recorded by the scribes who preserved your word. And I love your word and I believe in your word. And it was in your very word that I found your name written there. I couldn't find Yahweh anywhere in any Hebrew or Jewish source. So now, on the other hand, I didn't know how to pronounce the name. I was told that the name is the vowels of Adonai. And
okay, so the Yod He Vav He, that you were told, and this is what's taught in American Christian Cemetery, that Yod He Vav He, the vowels are the vowels of Adonai.
Well, and I was taught that at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem.
Okay.
Not just at Christian seminaries. And this is in the grammars of biblical Hebrew. The main grammar of biblical Hebrew is written by a German guy named Gesenius in the 1800s, and to this day, it's the definitive grammar of biblical Hebrew. People have modified and improved upon it, but basically, that's the basis of modern biblical grammars. And Gesenius established that the name was Yahweh. What did he base that on? I think we'll get to that in a future episode.
And so, TurretinFan, here is a Hebrew expert gone through the manuscripts. He's showing that Yahweh does not appear in any Hebrew manuscript, and he is showing that Gesenius is the one that you look to for the name of Jupiter, or the name of Yahweh Pitta, being popularized. And so exactly what I've written in my book. And so you know, and this is what I find, like I was saying earlier about the Peter Gurry thing or the James Snap thing. Many times people will look at me and say, well, Nick Sayers, he's just some weird sounding Australian guy from a rinky-dink old village town, Lismore, and what would he know? Well, if I'm saying things that are true or untrue, you should be able to discern that, regardless of who I am, or regardless of how clunky I say things, or if I sound like I've just woken up in the morning and I'm wiping the sleep out of my eyes and I say something. It's like, well, and oftentimes I'll have a speaker and I'll say things wrong, or I'll be dyslexic and say something that's backwards, And but here we have Nehemiah Gordon, a top Hebrew linguist. You have to deal with his conclusions, which are the same as my conclusions. And so that's where I would debunk him. You know what I mean? You've sort of debunked me, waved your hand and said, no, it's just rubbish and it's not worth looking into. And it's like, well, okay, so are you going to keep proclaiming the name of Yahweh? Are you going to keep saying that that's the name of God, when clearly, I mean, I think I laid it out very clearly in my book that it's related to Gesenius, and Gesenius popularized that type of notion. But at the end of the day, that's something you have to deal with, that there is zero manuscript evidence. So and that's the thing, there's zero manuscript evidence, where at least with Revelation 16:5, for the reading of Isomenos, Beza had a manuscript. So we have manuscript evidence, not on us today, but in the historical records, that people had this manuscript evidence for that reading. But for the name of God, which is a huge deal, it's, you got zero. You're saying the name of Jupiter, which Gesenius said, that was his claim, that it came from Jupiter. And so I would suggest that you do your homework, study this type of material, and then get back to us and say, yeah, well, this is my reasons why I'm still going to go with Yahweh, or I'm not going to go with Yahweh.
So,
okay, well, you're going to show us the source where that came from.
We're going to actually get to the source, yeah. But before we get to that, so 17 years ago, I'm sitting minding my own business, and I have this job at the Hebrew University, and I'm proofreading the Bible. And as I'm proofreading the Bible, I had already seen that the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh doesn't have the vowels of Adonai, which made no sense because I was told this as a fact. It was common knowledge. It's in Gesenius, the biblical Hebrew grammar. Everyone knows those are the vowels of Adonai, but I open up the manuscripts, and not only is it not of the vowels of Adonai, but it's missing one of the 3 vowels. And how do I know it's missing a vowel? Well, there's certain rules of Hebrew grammar and phonology and pronunciation. If you have those 4 letters, you have to have at least 3 vowels, or at least vowel symbols. And so there's a vowel symbol that's missing. And I realized, wait, if I can know what that vowel symbol is, maybe that's the name. And there I am minding my own business, and I'm proofreading the Bible, and I've got a stack of photographs of the Aleppo Codex, the most accurate copy of the Bible in existence. And
this is what the Shrine of the Book is protecting,
right.
the nuclear-proof vault.
Right. Well, the Shrine of the Book has 2 pages on display, and the rest of it's in the vault, along with the Dead Sea Scrolls at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. But I have photographs, one-to-one, color photographs, and I'm checking every jot and tittle. And all of a sudden, I find a place where one of those vowels that's supposed to be missing isn't missing. And there's a full set of vowels, and I can read the name the way it's written, because the way it's normally written in most Bible manuscripts. And today I can tell you, because I know about the name in over 1,000 Bible manuscripts, most Bible manuscripts, about 80% of the Bible manuscripts we've looked at, don't have this missing vowel, meaning it's missing in those vowels, in those manuscripts. And even the ones that do have it, usually don't have it. In other words, the name 6,827 times. Aleppo Codex only has those full vowels 7 times, which means the rest of the places that it's missing. And why is that? Because the scribes don't want us to pronounce this
deliberately
name.
Missing.
Absolutely. By design, they left out the middle vowel so Jews wouldn't accidentally. You'd come across that word and you wouldn't accidentally pronounce it. That was what they were doing. And every once in a while, they slipped up and they put in the full vowels. They put in that missing vowel. Why'd they do that? It's kind of like when you're maybe texting and you're thinking of the certain word in your head and you type a word that sounds like that. It happens to me all the time. I write there instead of there, right? Or 2 and 2, and well, so they're writing it, right? And they slip up and they put in the full vowels. And they didn't do it often, right? 7 times out of thousands of times is not a lot at all. And the Aleppo Codex is it's 7 times, and the Leningrad Codex about 50 times. That was the other one I had 17 years ago. So over the years, I amassed more. I've got 5 manuscripts a little over a year ago. And then I start to look for more. And I shared in the Gentiles Should Know My Name about how I found 16 rabbis who said that the name explicitly said the name is Jehovah. Right? So we were told this myth. It's a myth that the Jews don't know how to pronounce the name. And I found out, well, the Jews think they know how to pronounce the name at the very least. And no one will talk about this in the scientific literature. In the academic literature, you'll look in the encyclopedias and in the journal articles, they won't say anything about, well, the Jews thought they knew how to pronounce the name, but they were wrong, and here's our reason. They don't even address it because they don't even know about it. So we have 16 rabbis who say the name is Jehovah. And then I had only 5 Bible manuscripts. I felt a little awkward there. I have only 5 Bible. I need more Bible manuscripts. My goal, Michael, was to get to 10 Bible manuscripts. And I thought if I worked for the rest of my life, I might get to 10. And instead, now I have over 1,000. Which is, it's a miracle, and I don't want to talk about more of that in a future episode, the miracle. But in a way, this brings me full circle back to something that we started out many years ago. So this is looking at the name Jehovah in the Old Testament in what I call the Tanakh. That's my Bible, and you came to me with an issue in the New Testament, your Bible, and asked me a question, and that now can come full circle and teach us also something about the name in my Bible. But can we go back to that, what the original problem was?
Well, this is one of the most significant things in my life. I was living in Jerusalem, and we had a young man that was attending one of the yeshivas. He was a believer. He's the son of a pastor from the United States. As a matter of fact, his father, I woke up to the Hebrew roots of the faith. And so now, years later, his son is coming over and attending a yeshiva. And week by week, it just kept on getting more bizarre. And I saw this young man as he was attempting to follow what Jesus said in the Gospel of Matthew. And this was his reasoning for doing what he was doing, and this is something I brought up to you. Now, it says this is really 2 days before the Passover, in which Yeshua was crucified. Then spake Jesus, I'm reading King James, to the multitude.
This is Matthew 23.
And his disciples. This is Matthew 23. And this is in verse 2 here. Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All, therefore, whatsoever they bid or command you to observe, that observe and do. And so he was in his heart wanting to follow what Yeshua, what Jesus said to do.
So this man believes in Yeshua, and he's Jewish. And he's saying, hey, I should actually do what Yeshua said to do and obey the Pharisees.
Right.
Because they sit in the seat of Moses.
Right. And so he was up every morning at 4:30 in the morning, davening at the wall. He was doing all these things. And when he would come over for Shabbat dinner, then he would start bringing up, well, if we eat this first, and this is really encoded in this book, you may be familiar with it, Guide to Blessings. If you eat this first, then you must say this blessing. But if you eat more of this other thing, then you say this blessing. And it was just mincing on things that if Yeshua really said to do this, and I watched the light go out in this young man's eyes. It's like he got so confused by these things. And you were raised as a rabbinic Jew.
Yeah, my father was an Orthodox rabbi. I was raised as a modern day Pharisee. And this was just common daily life. If you ate an apple, you made a certain blessing over the apple. Borei pri ha'etz. Blessed is the one who creates the fruit. Beautiful thing, right? Until you realize, I want a snack, and now I've got to start thinking, do I eat this thing first or that thing first? And which blessing do I make on it? And it becomes part of... it becomes a major part of everyday life. So you sit down for a snack, and you've got an apple, and you've got a glass of water, and you make one blessing over the apple, a different blessing over the water. Then you want bread. So now you get up and you wash your hands according to a certain ritual, and you make the blessing over the washing the hands that God commanded us to wash the hands. And then you sit down and you make the blessing over the hamotzi lechem in haaretz, the blessing over the bread. And now, if I had done the bread first, the blessing over the bread covers all the other foods. And so I don't need to that. So now I've made extra blessings. So now it becomes a strategic question. What do I eat first? And it's ridiculous. And growing up, I remember thinking, like, God can't care what I eat first. That can't be, like, this is, I don't find this in the Bible. I was looking in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, and I was saying to my rabbis, you're spending all day teaching me which blessings to make and all kinds of rules and which shoe to put on first in the morning, all kinds of rules and regulations. That's not in our Torah. And they'd say, well, it's in the oral Torah, that there was this teachings of the Pharisees, these takanot, that I talk about in the Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. And I ended up writing a book about it. I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to answer your question that you came to me with, saying, how could
this is the book that answers my questions.
Right.
And
exactly. Well, and it really started out with you coming to me saying, hey, Yeshua seems to be saying, all therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. Sure sounds like he's saying to obey the Pharisees. Well, yeah, and when I was doing this research, of course, I didn't actually know what a Moses' seat is because we don't have those anymore in modern day synagogues. So I had a background in archaeology. My bachelor's degree was in archaeology. And people can see here, this is a Moses' seat at Chorazin in Israel.
That's right.
It was actually discovered in excavations. So they did have it 2,000 years ago. And you can read about it in some of the rabbinical literature. They make references to it. And it turns out what they would do is they would stand in the synagogue and read from the scroll of scripture. And you see Yeshua did that in the Gospel of Luke.
That's right.
He read Isaiah chapter 61. And then after the reading, the rabbi would sit in this chair and he would say, hey, what we just read, this is what it means. And you have to accept my interpretation. And so the one who sits in the seat of Moses, that is sitting in the seat of authority. That's what it means in that historical context. Once I found this out, I said, wow, Michael, this really is a problem.
Yeah.
In other words, from a New
let-
Testament perspective.
Yeah, and let me give you a little bit more background on that, because see, I had this question because I saw this man's life change, and it was changing for the worst, and what was going on, and I felt responsible for it. I felt responsible for his father and for him, and I was really praying about this, and I said, and there is no way that Yeshua said this. And I knew I couldn't talk to any Christians or Christian ministers and say, there's no way that Yeshua couldn't have said something that's in the King James Version of the Bible, because I'd be tarred and feathered by doing that.
The other issue is I think most Christians will read that and say, well, that was only up to the crucifixion. Now that's done away with.
So in a way, like, they're talking about side issues here. Now, this is in the playlist of the sacred name, and so they will touch on those issues, but they seem to be going through the traditions, which is interesting. It's interesting to know what goes on in these Orthodox groups, but also it can help us to relate to how the Jews in the biblical times and their customs and their practices, and how that relates to our reading of the New Testament. But I'm glad that this guy's saying the King James Bible, because it just sort of cuts through everything. And what you've got then is Nehemiah wanting to, as a Jewish guy, not a Christian, wanting to respect this guy. I don't know, he must be a Christian who, has, you obey the commandments. We know there's a lot of groups like this. Sometimes it might be the Hebrew Israelites guy, the Black Hebrew Israelites, the Seventh-day Adventists. There are groups who have the legalisms of the Old Testament, and they mix that in with the law, and so there's many of these groups. But I'm glad that he's reading the King James, because then Nehemiah feels he's a bit checked by just saying, well, that's a textual variant, or that's a problem, or that's this and that. So he's actually showing respect, which he would have to think about whenever he's dealing with this guy, and whenever this guy's dealing with him throwing verses his way. He would have to go, well, okay, well, I won't say, well, the ESV's better there or whatever. He's actually saying, yeah, okay, well, that's the Bible, King James.
We don't actually have to follow what Jesus said. It was nailed to the cross.
That's right.
And here you had somebody who was Jewish who was saying, hey, I want to follow the Torah. And instead of following the Torah, he ends up obsessing about, do I eat the apple blessing, I say? Right? I mean, and saying, well, Yeshua told me to follow the Pharisees and obey what, because they sit in the seat of Moses. They've got the chair of authority. So in other words, when this man maybe was a Christian, he didn't have to worry about this, because all the law was nailed to the cross. Now that you're trying to follow the Torah, well, the Pharisees tell us a lot of things about how to follow the Torah. Do we have to obey them? And it sure sounds like it from this verse. And so here's what I did, which to me was just like, it made sense. Let's see what other manuscripts say. Because this is what I do. I look at manuscripts. This is what I've been trained to do at the Hebrew University for decades. At the time, this was many years ago. So I look in the Greek manuscripts. As far as I could tell, at least from what was documented, all the Greek manuscripts had the same thing. There wasn't any difference.
I think I said at the time, every extant Greek manuscript says basically the same thing right there.
At least.
And I was lost. I couldn't go any further with my resources, with my skills, but I knew you to be an honest scholar, and that when I ask you questions, if you didn't have the answers, you would dig, and you went on a digging expedition that resulted in what we're going to be able to share with everyone during this series, But what happened? The initial thing.
So initially, what I found was you can see it here. This is a section from the British Library manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew. What? So it turns out there's this Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew that was preserved by Jewish rabbis.
That's right.
And here it says, this is section 97. It's divided differently, but it's the same words. And it says, "Az diber Yeshua el ha'am ve'el talmidav." Then Yeshua spoke to the people and to his disciples, Lemor, Al kisei Moshe Yeshua perushim v'chachamim. Upon the seat of Moses sit the Pharisees and the sages. And now all that he says to you, diligently do. In other words, what's their claim to authority? That they sit on the seat of Moses. Therefore, do what Moses says. which is, I mean, so brilliant. And it kind of reminds you of where, you know, they say, "Who should we pay our taxes?" Well, whose face is on that coin? Caesar. So give it to Caesar, right?
Okay, so he's actually saying that there's a textual variant there, because in the King James it says all that they say to do and observe, where he's saying all that he says to do and observe. So talking about Moses, which if you're sitting in Moses' seat, well, they're basically saying, you know, reading the Torah. But and that is what Christ would be saying to do. Obviously, we who are dispensationalists, we don't follow, you know, or even if you're covenant in covenant theology, you wouldn't follow the law. But I think that's he's excited about that. I'm sort of like, okay, I just think it's just an aberration in a Hebrew manuscript, no big deal. And I'm pretty sure that this manuscript, I don't want to just discredit the manuscript, but it's like, I'm pretty sure it was written like after, 1611 sort of thing. It was written maybe like 300 years ago, 200 years ago, but it's just of interest. And so, yeah.
What's the name of that chair they sit in? It's the seat of Moses. So do what he says. Do what Moses says, not what the people in the chair say, which is incredible. Like,
so obviously he's very excited when he comes up with textual variants. So.
Like what a brilliant answer. And you'd never guess, I'd never have guessed this in a million years based on what I read in the King James Version, based on what I read in the Greek. And here we find it in Hebrew manuscript. So I'd found this in a Hebrew manuscript. This was published originally by George Howard in 1987, and he knew about 9 manuscripts of the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew. 2 of his manuscripts read exactly this way. And I said, there's got to be more manuscripts. So I start digging for more manuscripts. Now, I'm not sure I want to get to what I found there first. I think I want to share something a little, one of the really interesting things that came up. So as I'm looking at this Hebrew Matthew, I'm like, hey, that was interesting for Michael in Matthew 23 and Matthew 15. There might be some other interesting things in this Hebrew Matthew. So I start reading it from the beginning, and look what I found. Look what I find. It's really cool. And this ties into what we started out with, talking about the name. So here's an image from Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. And if you could read medieval Hebrew, you can read this. It's an unusual script if you're not familiar with it. But right over here, you have this symbol, which is the symbol He, and it appears twice. And this He, over here and over here, what this represents is the name Hashem. Now, remember, this was copied by a rabbi, meaning if you believe what we're told in ancient sources, it was written by Matthew. In Hebrew, we're told that by Papias, a church father who died in the year 130, who tells us that Matthew collected the words in the Hebrew language and each translated them as he was able. So what happened is Matthew wrote this in Hebrew. At some point, it's brought over into the synagogue. And you think, how did this get into synagogues? Well, what happened is the Catholic Church came along and started persecuting Jews who believed in Yeshua. So where are they going to hide? So they hide among the other Jews, and they bring their manuscripts with them. Over the centuries, they assimilate, and this now is being copied by a Jewish rabbi. When a Jewish rabbi sees God's name, Yud He Vav He, outside of the Old Testament, it's very rare for him to ever write Yud He Vav He. It happens occasionally, but it's very rare. Normally, instead of writing Yud He Vav He, he uses a symbol to represent the name, and that symbol is usually a He with a line over it, which is exactly what we see here. So coming back to the name, I'm looking years.
That's interesting. So it's a He with a line over it. So basically, it's sort of like a. I'll get a Hebrew representative letter so I can show you Hebrew alphabet. That's a He there, and with a line above it. Okay, so it's very interesting. I might just go to Wikipedia. That's a He there. So he's saying that sometimes the Tetragrammaton can be replaced with a He with the line above it. Isn't that interesting? And so that's material I could put into my Revelation 16:5, but more material to show that the name of Jehovah was expanded, contracted, substituted in many, many different ways.
Years ago, in the New Testament in Hebrew, and I see the name of the Father, Yud-He-Vav-He. Well, in the Greek, it doesn't appear. In the Greek, you have Kurios, which is Lord, and you have Theos, which is God, but you never have the actual name Yud-He-Vav-He, and I'm not even here talking about the issue of the vowels, just the Tetragrammaton, the personal name of the God of Israel, revealed in Exodus 3:15, appears 6,827 times in the Tanakh. In the Old Testament, appears 0 times in the New Testament, until we find this Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. And I say, wait, what's that doing there? The name was in the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, and then everything started to make sense. So there's a Dead Sea Scroll that was discovered at a place called Nachal Hever, and it's the Septuagint in Greek. It's the Old Testament in Greek. But when it comes to the name of God, it doesn't say Kurios in these earliest copies of the Septuagint. It says Yud He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton in Hebrew. So you're reading this document in Greek, and all of a sudden you see a Hebrew word. Well, what happened is, as Christians started to copy the Septuagint, they didn't know how to read the Hebrew or write the Hebrew, and then it was replaced with Lord, which by that time had become a Jewish tradition. But originally, it seems that from this evidence here, and we'll get into some other exciting things that I discovered, maybe in the second half of this episode, if you'll let me. There's other really exciting things, other New Testament documents that I came across.
Oh, no, not yet, not yet.
Okay.
I've been waiting for 18 years because you told me when you found these other Hebrew manuscripts of these other Gospels, you said, I can't release it, and we can't say anything about it. And I said, don't tell me what they are. That way I don't know. and so that's the answer I can give to everyone. I've been waiting 18 years for this, Nehemiah.
But now we can release them. It's really exciting.
And you've got them. So
it's really exciting. But anyway, Michael, I want to look at something here before we wrap up the first part here. So what made George Howard think that this was an original Hebrew document, not just a translation from Greek? So here we have Matthew chapter 1, and we can see here what it says in the Greek is chapter 1, verse 21, she'll bring forth a son, you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. And it's really interesting. I'll ask Christian groups around the world, I'll say, do you know what the name Jesus means? And a lot of them will have no idea. And some of them will say, oh, it means salvation, which isn't entirely accurate. It's true, but it's only half true. Now, if you look in the Hebrew Matthew, what it says is, you shall call his name Yeshua, for he will save my people from their iniquities. And the Hebrew word for Yeshua, or the name there is Yeshua, and the 3 words in English, he will save, translate a single word in Hebrew, this word Yoshia. So why is he called Yeshua? Because Yoshia, he will save. And that makes perfect sense in Hebrew, because the name Yeshua itself is a contraction of 2 Hebrew words. And those 2 Hebrew words are Jehovah, the Father, Yoshia, he will save. And so, I mean, some people have pointed in the New Testament where it talks about he comes in his Father's name, and his Father's name is in him. And that's actually literally true, that the name Yeshua has in it the name Jehovah, Jehovah Yoshia, Jehovah will save, or Jehovah saves. And so, and it gets even more exciting. I don't think I'll have time to get to it right now.
And I think most Christians who are studying, at least to the level that I'm at, would understand that. I don't think it's something that is uniquely Hebrew. Yes, it is in Hebrew, and yes, we do think that Matthew has a lot of influence, Hebrew influence. But at the end of the day, when you just read the English, it's quite clear. And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins. And most people understand that it's that Jesus is Joshua, and that it means Jehovah is salvation. And so Jehoshua, Jehovah, and then Shua, salvation. So, and in this context, you're talking about Joseph, who's a Hebrew guy. And so I'm all for people going to the Hebrew manuscripts and looking at all that sort of stuff and bringing forth this material. But I would say that anyone who's doing any type of Bible study would go, okay, well, the context is it's a Hebrew guy. What language would this angel be speaking? Most probably Hebrew to Joseph. And when he's saying, you shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins, that is the etymological root of the name Jesus. Most Christians who are studying that would see that. So, but anyway, it's knowing the original languages does help, and you see it clearer, and you see it more instantly. But I wouldn't say that it's not something that's very clear in the English.
Now, but so this name Yeshua is itself a shortened form of Yehoshua, which is the name Joshua. And there were people in the Old Testament who had this name. Joshua, the son of Nun, was the first man ever to be called Yehoshua. His name originally was Hosea, he saves. And Moses decided, you know what? Now that we've been taken out of Egypt, my servant Hosea, I'm going to change his name to be more specific about who saves. And he called him Yehoshua, Jehovah saves. And then Yehoshua, Joshua, the son of Nun, in Nehemiah chapter 8:17, my favorite book, the book of Nehemiah, because I wrote it. No, in that book, he is then called Yeshua. So there's no question whatsoever. Jesus of Nazareth in his day was known as Yeshua.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemiah Gordon.
Okay, so we've got a comment from Be Separate. He says, one of Nehemiah's vids, he gets into the reformers having the correct name and vowels on Bible pages and coins. Okay, so that's very interesting. So I guess as we go through more of this material, we'll discover more and more things. So let's just let this continue to roll.
Thank you for supporting Nehemiah's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiahswall.com.
Have you ever discussed the name Yahuwah at all? I'm sure you've heard of it.
Okay, so this goes through an alternative to Jehovah, to Yahuwah. Do I really want to go through that at the moment? Probably not. So what we might do is go through this one, number 15, as the last one. And then I guess over the next week or so, I'll listen back through these videos that I've made. I'll discover the ones that I skipped over. I'm pretty sure I skipped over this 48-minute one. 49-minute one here, the name of God, which is probably one of the better ones. So that would be a good one to do on my third video. But I'll go through this last one. What is the sacred name of God? Is Yahuwah a possible pronunciation? That'll be interesting, but you know, we're sort of getting into some rabbit trails there. So let's just jump into this.
You know the topic. We were basically, according with all the evidence that you have explored in your field, what do you think will Moses pronounce the name? But let's start with the what evidence we have, biblical evidence.
Yahweh is the common understanding of most scholars today. That was introduced in 1699. He was a church father who, around the year 450 CE or AD, he wrote that the Jews don't pronounce the name, the Tetragrammaton, but the Samaritans call it Yahweh.
Did that have something in common with the name Yeshua?
So I was just at the Israel Museum the other day, and they have an ossuary. It's a bone box. And there was a man buried in that bone box whose name was Yehoshua.
Hola nuevamente, aquí estamos en nuestro podcast Amando tu Tanaj. y estamos en el World Union Jewish Studies, en la conferencia, en el congreso, si pudiéramos llamarlo así, ¿ok? De la Unión Mundial de Estudios Judíos, celebrada cada 4 años. Y como habíamos dicho, tenemos la oportunidad de entrevistar a un académico, un erudito. Nehemia Gordon está con nosotros. Nehemia es el creador del podcast Hebrew Voices y también obtuvo su PhD, su doctorado, en la Universidad Bar Ilan, exactamente donde estoy haciendo mi investigación. Y lo hizo prácticamente este es el título del PhD en inglés, obviamente, lo hizo The Writing, Erase and Correction of the Tetragrammaton in the Medieval Hebrew Bible Manuscript, right? Ok, eso es en español, ¿verdad? En los escritos, borrones o borradores o correcciones del tetragramaton.
Good luck if you don't speak Spanish, but this is only the introduction, and then he starts speaking English.
El tetragramatón es el nombre sagrado de Dios. Las 4 letras en hebreo que forman el nombre sagrado de Dios, ¿ok? En los manuscritos bíblicos medievales, prácticamente. Entonces, también obtuvo su maestría, su master's degree, ¿ok? Y bachelor degree en la Universidad Hebrea de Jerusalén, donde estamos ahora mismo, the Hebrew University, right?
I actually studied right here, where we're
right
sitting.
here, yes.
This is where I did my bachelor's and my master's.
Very good, very good. So, also he works in the... Él trabajó también, claro, en español, él trabajó también descifrando los antiguos manuscritos en hebreo, ¿ok? De los rollos del Mar Muerto. O sea, que tenemos un erudito aquí de muy buen calibre para hablar del tema que nos compete hoy. Nehemia, thank you.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be able to speak to your audience. I'm looking forward to it because although I live in the greatest Spanish-speaking country in the world, Texas, I have not yet learned Spanish.
Okay, that's not a Spanish-speaking in the world, but that's fine. I got you. Okay, you know the topic. We were discussing this before, and basically, according with all the evidence that you have explored in your field, what do you think will Moses pronounce the name? But let's start with the what evidence we have, biblical evidence.
Well, let's start with this. We don't have a recording from ancient Israel. When Moses heard God speak at the burning bush, there wasn't a tape recorder, or if there has, we haven't gotten that tape yet. So all we can really do is work with the evidence we have. And the common scholarly understanding is that Jehovah, or in English Jehovah, and I think in Spanish Jehovah. Right? How do you say
Jehovah.
it? Jehovah. So the common understanding is that is a Christian misunderstanding. They call it an impossible hybrid. That it's a combination, they say, of the vowels of the word Adonai and the letters of the Tetragrammaton of God's name, Yud He Vav He. The problem is that's not true. First of all, we have it from Jewish sources. So, I call this the stupid Christian hypothesis, right? The assumption is there was a Christian, we know his name was Galatinus. In 1518, he was the first one, as far as we know, to introduce the pronunciation Yehovah into the Christian world. And that's where you get Jehovah in English. But we have it in Jewish sources that predate that, right? And so it's not that, and then also their assumption is that Galatinus just didn't know that the Jews pronounce the name as Adonai. Well, that's not true. In the actual context in which Galatinus discusses the pronunciation Yehovah, he says, well, the Jews read it Adonai, but if you take the vowels the way they are, it's not, the name would be read Yehovah. So he was well aware of that. So this uninformed Christian hypothesis is a myth. It's not based on any actual evidence from history. Yahweh is the common understanding of most scholars today. That was introduced in 1699 by a man named Gilbert Genebrard, who is another Christian author. Now, what did he base it on? So there is a statement by a Christian church father named Theodoret of Cyrus. Some people pronounce his name as Theodoret of Cyrus. I don't know what you say in Spanish. Theodoro, maybe. I don't know. So he was a church father who, around the year 450 CE or AD, he wrote that the Jews don't pronounce the name, the Tetragrammaton, but the Samaritans call it Yahweh. And so scholars have taken this supposed Samaritan pronunciation of the name and then said, well, that fits our theology. What's our theology? They say, what does the name of God mean? So we know from the Torah, Exodus 3:14, God says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which means I am that which I am, or I will be that which I will be. And then the very next verse, he further says to Moses that the name Yud He Vav He is his eternal name. And that's been understood for 1,000 years at least, actually goes back a lot longer, that
this is Exodus chapter 3 verse
14 and then 15.
Yes, because the context there is when he asked, okay, if the people ask me who sent me,
right, what name should I give them?
Yeah, so the topic there is the name.
Oh, it's absolutely the name, and it's the first introduction to Moses formally of the name. Moses may have known that name, maybe he knew it from the forefathers, it's a whole separate discussion. Yes. But the first time God revealed his name to him was at burning bush, Exodus 3:14 and 15. And in 14, he says, I am that which I am, or I will be what I will be. And the next verse, he says, his name is Yud He Vav He. And it's obvious, I think, to anybody reading this in Hebrew, that verse 14 gives you the explanation of verse 15. Right? Ehyeh is not the name per se. It is an explanation of the name. So there's a principle of Hebrew linguistics, really of all Semitic languages, that every noun, adjective, and verb is based on a three-letter root. And the three-letter root of I will be, Ehyeh, is the same as the three-letter root, clearly, of Yud He Vav He. And already we find we find it in Jewish sources, we find it in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, and we actually find it also in Samaritan sources.
Notice they find it in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, the name of Jehovah. Very clear. And so he's obviously seen that Revelation 16:5 has that the other four triadic declarations that have, which art and was and art to come, have the name of Jehovah there. So it's very clear.
Wait, but when you say...
So what I'm saying is not strange. What I'm saying is very clear. It's very well established among people who are Jehovists. They understand this principle, that it's in the New Testament. Regardless of whether you believe in New Testament or not, it's just like reading in the Dead Sea Scrolls. You see the Essenes have a document. Oh, it's in the Essenes. And so he would just view it like that. Oh, well, this is sort of like a breakaway group. Oh, they've used the name of Jehovah. They've expanded it there, etc. So let's have a listen.
Jewish sources. Yeah. Which time we're talking about? The manuscripts.
Well, we're going to get to the manuscripts first. Okay. First, I'm talking about what the name means, okay? Without even talking about what the pronunciation means. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we have in Jewish sources, in the New Testament and Samaritan sources, we have an explanation of the name as he that was, he that is, and he that will be. Right? Now, how could it be in all three of those sources? And the answer is that this was something that was known in the Second Temple period. Okay. Right? Otherwise, how would it be that Samaritans, Jews...
And so... obviously, if it's the name of Jehovah, it's very clear. And notice he didn't say, the name of Jehovah is the one which is and was, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like that's not a full name. I mean, it would be absolutely bizarre and strange to like say we're talking about the name of Jesus. Jehovah is salvation. Imagine it just said Jehovah is nice or whatever. It's like, well, it doesn't fit the full etymology of the name, so there's an error there. So anyone who knows and understands Hebrew would clearly see that which art and was and holy is an error because it hasn't got the full name there. And so very clear.
And the book of Revelation all have the same explanation. I guess you could say it was revealed to John at Patmos, right? But as a scholar, I want to take a different approach and say, what is the common source that all these three different streams have? And that's that there's information that's known in the Second Temple period. Right? That's where we can for sure trace it back to. So the name means Hayah Hoveh Yehyeh. He that was, he that is, he that will be. And we get that from Exodus 3:14 and how the three-letter root ties into verse 15. So that's what it means. That really isn't disputed in medieval Jewish sources. It's not really disputed in like I said, it's the Book of Revelation. It's in Samaritan sources. In 1699, Gilbert Genebrard comes along. He's a Christian, and he says, "Wait a minute. The name of God should mean creator." And how do we get from the word Yud He Vav He to creator? Well, Hebrew has 7 conjugations, or binyanim, and Ehiyeh Asher Ehiyeh, Exodus 3:14, I will be that which I will be, is in the Kal conjugation, the simplest conjugation. He says if it's going to mean creator, we have to put it in the he feel, which is the causative conjugation. And then he goes from Yud He Vav He, which is Hayahoveh Hieh, to Yahweh.
Okay, when you say, well, just for my audience, when you say Hayahoveh Hieh, you means
he was, he is, he will be.
He will be.
He is to come, or he will
correct.
be.
This is so what you're saying, just for my audience, okay? What you're saying is that the name, the meaning of the name will include all these 3 statements.
The name comes from those 3 statements.
The name comes from those 3
and like I
statements.
said, that's in Jewish sources, it's in the Book of Revelation, and it's in Samaritan sources. 3 very diverse types of sources.
Okay, because you have been repeated that.
Hayahoveh, he that was, he that is, he will be. That's the meaning of the name, and that's what Exodus 3:14 is telling us. And look, you have to know a little bit of Hebrew, which you know. So we've got 4 prefixes of the future form, right? We have Aleph, Yud, Tav, Nun, and they call it Eitan letters, or in English I say Ethan, right? So the Ehiyeh, I will be, is I, and then he calls himself Yud, he that is, right? The Yud of Yud He Vav He is he that will be, he that is. So Genebrard comes along and he says, no, we don't want it in the Kal, like everybody's understood it up until now. It's got to mean creator based on our theology. And then he comes up with Yahweh, which in English became Yahweh.
Okay, let me explain that. The thing is that Kal, that voice, if we can put it this way, the voice that he's proposing is the one active and causative voice. Absolutely. Because he wanted to give the impression that God is causing, that he's actively
creating. We all agree he's creating.
Yes.
They wanted his name to mean he that creates. So we went from his name meaning, which we get from Exodus 3:14, I am, he that was, he that is, he that will be. We go from that, the Kal conjugation, to a causative, the he feel, for theological reasons. Now his name means he that causes to be, and therefore creator. So this is a completely theological construct.
And how the sounds when you put in the he?
Yahweh. Yahweh. Right? Americans say Yahweh, but it's Yahweh. Okay? And it would have been Yahweh.
It's important you mention Yahweh because this is something very established.
Oh no, it's a scholarly consensus.
Yeah, when you say something different, you are if you are in a religious country, you're a sinner.
Well, I mean that's
I'm just telling you.
That seems like a theological statement. I don't know, but
Yahweh it's very
it's a scholarly consensus, and the Anchor Bible Dictionary calls it a scholarly guess. So what's the guess based on? First, there's this theology, he that causes to be, and then we have the statement of Theodoret in 450, who says the Samaritans pronounce it Yahweh, and they said, oh, that fits perfectly with what we think from our theology. There's a few other points that I'm not going to go into right now. Clement of Alexandria is really the third piece of evidence. That's a whole separate discussion. So what do we have in Jewish sources, and what do we have in Hebrew Bible manuscripts? There isn't a single Hebrew Bible manuscript that has Yahweh or Yahweh. Nothing, nowhere, anywhere. There isn't a single Jewish source that has Yahweh. Let's say an ancient or medieval Jewish source.
That's important. You are saying that there is no even one source, manuscript evidence, right? Textual manuscript evidence that have the Yahweh.
This is a beautiful example.
So Bart Ehrman, Dan Wallace, TurretinFan, James White, anyone in the academy, even Tommy Wasserman, Peter Gurry, Elijah Hixson, can you explain to me where this Yahweh name has come from and why you guys are so interested in looking at the manuscript evidence for some things but not other things? Why you are defending this name and why you aren't just simply going with the manuscript evidence? So if someone has discovered a whole bunch of manuscripts that say Jehovah and they don't say Yahweh, why are you going with this name? It's a pretty reasonable question, and so I would say, why, Mark Ward, why are you not swapping Yahweh for Jehovah? Start using it.
So listen to this. I was writing something up about the name Yahweh, and then I went to put the Hebrew vowels in. And so I went to look in Hebrew manuscripts. What are the vowels? Is it a patach or a kamatz? Right? In modern Hebrew pronunciation, they're both pronounced ah. So which one is it? I didn't have any manuscripts. So I wrote to these Christian folks, or maybe Hebrew roots folks, who say Yahweh, and I say, which vowels do I put in here? Is it a patach? Is it a shva? Is it a segel? That's what I thought, right? Based on the pattern of yarbeh, of other key field verbs, I mean grammatically. They said, we don't use Hebrew vowels. Okay, but if you can't translate it into the Hebrew vowel system, then it has no meaning in Hebrew, right? So, and of course, it's the patach shva segel without getting too.
See, one of the things is, if you can't have vowels, like imagine having the letters C and T. Is it C-A-T, cat, or is it C-O-T, cot? Is it, we've only got a few choices. And see, sometimes this is how textual criticism is done in the Old Testament. What they do is they say, well, let's just get rid of the vowels and let's just deal with the consonants. And then the next thing you know, they're making up words, or a word might have a similar consonantal pattern, but it doesn't have the same vowels. And so they might say, have Joseph leaning on top of his staff or leaning on his bed, and then they equate these two as being the same, and the Septuagint might make that error where they haven't read the vowels properly, and then the next thing you know, it's a textual variant in the Hebrew. And so we see this all the time.
Technical, which is based on the pattern of Yahweh. But where did I find that? In Gesenius's Hebrew grammar, which is from the 19th century. So I couldn't find a source before the 19th century that gave me the exact Hebrew vowels to use. Galatinus is writing in Latin. Yes. What is it in Hebrew? I got to go to a 19th century German to get the answer.
That's the information that I wanted to share with my audience. It's like Gesenius was a German scholar.
And a brilliant scholar.
It was brilliant. We still using it.
For sure. He's the basis for Hebrew grammar.
So he was translated into English, and that's the source of...
Well, the German. He wrote in German.
He wrote in German, but was translated into English.
Right.
And then we use this.
So it's translated in English by Tregegels, and so that's why he is revered as being a great evangelical scholar. But in this place, clearly where they talk about the name of Jehovah, they have Gesenius's material, but then it has in brackets, this has been completely I nearly said redacted, but it's not the word I'm looking for. I guess, redacted. And so Gesenius no longer believes this, and it's lots of little bracketed words in the text that say Gesenius has basically renounced this type of nonsense. And so even he doesn't believe it. The guy who popularized it. So it's almost like saying, Benny Hinn has, spoken out against, being slain in the spirit or something like that. It's like, well, he's the one popularizing this sort of rubbish everywhere. And even he's coming against it, so.
It's source,
Right.
Okay, but this is interesting. He's German guy.
Right. Well, so then, now what about Jehovah, which is, we find that, I have a study called 10 Rabbis Speak Out on the Name, and I actually right now have 19 rabbis who explicitly say that the vowels of the name are Jehovah. Shvach Olam Kamatz in Hebrew, Jehovah. Now you could say they didn't know what they were talking about.
Like Shvach Olam Kamatz pronounced like O, A.
Or look, there's different Hebrew dialects. In some Hebrew dialects, the Kamatz is awe, right? So it could be Jehovah. Right, that's like the Spanish you speak and the Spanish of Argentina, right? That doesn't change the meaning.
This sounds very close to the modern Hebrew speaker, the vowels.
Right. Well, that's the traditional Sephardic pronunciation, and it actually goes back to what we call the Eretz Yisrael vocalization, which we find in some manuscripts as a whole separate discussion. But here's what some of the rabbis say. They say it has the same vowels of the word le'olam. which means forever. And why do they choose that specific word? Because he says in Exodus 3:15, and he said further to Moses, he says Jehovah, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, Zeh Shmi Le'olam, this is my name forever. So they say the name Yud He Vav He has the same vowels of Le'olam, which is E O A Shvach Olam Kamatz. Now you could say these rabbis didn't know what they were talking about. You could say they're wrong. But what you can't say is this is something that was invented by ignorant Christians, because we have multiple rabbis who, some of them were aware of what the Christians were saying, others had no clue what the Christians were saying, and they all believed it was Jehovah. There's at least all of those that I'm talking about. There is no rabbi in historical sources who says it's Yahweh or Yahweh. That's from literary sources. Then we go to the Hebrew Bible manuscripts, and we have the vowels Jehovah.
Yes.
We have them in...
People say, oh, that was plays that. Just playing here the devil advocate here, okay? People say, oh, that was play that based on the Adonai thing because the scribes want to hide the name. And so how do you respond to that?
If they wanted to put in the vowels of Adonai, they would have put in the vowels of Adonai. The vowels of Adonai, you can hear, is A-O-A, not E-O-A. And then they'll say, oh, well, it was impossible to put an A into a Yud. I could show you that it's not impossible. I could show you manuscripts where they actually did put in the vowels of Adonai.
As a mistake or
No. There were scribes who said, I want to put the vowels of Adonai in there, and they actually did it. Right?
So you explore those evidence.
Oh, absolutely. So it wasn't many scribes, but there were scribes who said, we read this word as Adonai. Nobody disputes that the Jews read it as Adonai.
Let me explain this. Your Nehemiah advisor was one of the professor in the same university I studied. One of my professors was Joseph Ofer, right? So Nehemiah explored, I don't know how many manuscripts you explored in your research, but the PhD of Nehemiah is basically...
I think my dissertation went through like 90,000 manuscript pages.
90,000 manuscript
crazy.
pages.
I don't even remember.
So I don't know how many times in those pages you explore the sacred name, the Tetragrammaton, the U-head.
So look, in my PhD dissertation, I wasn't looking at that question. I was going back a step further. And why was I going back a step further? So I've had people say to me, they say, well, Nehemiah, you're saying, and this is...
Wait. You were not looking at that question in your
No, I was looking at something even more fundamental, and I'll explain that. Let's back up a step. So years ago, I found in the Aleppo Codex that normally the middle vowel was not put in. And every once in a while, the scribe put in the middle vowel, meaning when the vowel isn't put in, you can't read the name.
Yeah,
and that is the scribe saying, don't read it, because if we're trying to prevent people from reading it, not me, the scribes, are trying to prevent people from reading it, and therefore they leave out a vowel. And every once in a while, about between 6 and 8 times, depending how you count it, the scribe of the Aleppo Codex put in the missing vowel, making it Jehovah. And my initial understanding, and I think this is probably still true, is he put that in by accident. Why did he put it in by accident? Because in his head he knew it was Jehovah.
Yes.
And then the response I got from people is, well, the scribes never made a mistake in the name. It's impossible. So I investigated that and ended up writing a PhD dissertation to answer that question. Did the scribes make mistakes with the name? And when they made a mistake, what did they do? Well, they did lots of different things. So there's a rabbinical rule. You're not allowed to erase the name. So what do you do when you make a mistake? And I documented in my PhD dissertation numerous different things they did. Sometimes they actually erased it, which they weren't supposed to.
I saw one of the lecture that you gave in Barilan in Hebrew was actually when you show manuscript where they erased the name.
We say in Hebrew chad v'chalak. Definitively, they took a razor and they erased it. They weren't supposed to, but they made a mistake. Sometimes they cut it out. Sometimes they put a circle around it. There's a whole bunch of different things they did. But the point is that I had to answer a more fundamental question because I had serious scholars telling me they never made a mistake with the name. It's impossible. All right, let's go see if that's the case. I looked through thousands of shelf marks of Bible manuscripts. Over, I don't remember the number. It was like over 90,000 pages. Maybe it was over 100,000. I don't remember. Thousands and thousands of pages searching for mistakes. And sometimes you go through 1,000 pages, you don't find any mistake, right?
Yes.
Or you find a mistake and it's really hard to see because you don't have a good photo. But I ended up finding 12 or 13 different methods of dealing with mistakes of the Tetragrammaton.
The Tetragrammaton, again, is the sacred name. The sacred name of God.
Right. And then how did they fix the mistake? And so to say they never made mistakes, they any manuscript of any length is going to have some kind of mistakes. And what makes the Aleppo Codex the most important manuscript of the Hebrew Bible, what makes it so valuable isn't that there's no mistakes, is that the mistakes have been fixed. And this is what Maimonides actually says, this 12th century rabbi. He mentions the Aleppo Codex, and he says it's so important because Ben Asher, the scribe, spent years proofreading and fixing it. And now, when I was studying the Aleppo Codex, I actually got to hold the Aleppo Codex in my hand.
This is important.
And examine it with a microscope.
Yeah, this is
which
important.
no one's ever done before.
I know. You get excited at this point, but this is important. We're almost closing, but this is important. Well, the Masoretic text is the basic text for all the translation, basically.
So the Aleppo Codex is the best representative of the Masoretic text,
which is very important.
Yeah, you can't say the Aleppo Codex and the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is the tradition of the Bible, down to the letters and the dots and the jots and the tittles, preserved by Jewish scribes.
And so what we have here with Nehemiah Gordon, it's a bit like talking to someone who is like working at Mount Athos and going through Greek manuscripts and basically saying, well, it's the Byzantine tradition that we go with and all the rest of it. And so someone who's a linguist, someone who knows their stuff, they know history, they know scribal patterns and things like that. And so it's invaluable material what Nehemiah is saying. And it's very important for us as Textus Receptus people, King James people, to also never forget that our roots, our Hebrew roots, are in the Masoretic text. And so that's what backs up the King James version.
From where all the translation coming from. Basically.
Absolutely.
So this is you hold the thing in your hands and you explore, you examine it.
I spent 3 days examining it with a microscope, literally.
Yeah. Okay.
The Aleppo Codex is the best representative of the Masoretic text, and already in its time when it was written in the 10th century, it was considered the best representative of the Masoretic text. Scribes used to come from all over the Jewish world to Jerusalem to check their manuscripts against the Aleppo Codex. And in that manuscript, the name usually is missing a vowel thousands of times. But
Which vowel?
The middle vowel of the name. So Jehovah, it was written Yet, Va, and there's a missing vowel in the middle. And in Hebrew, you can't pronounce the word without that vowel. And really, that it's a cue to the reader, don't read this word. Either by accident or on purpose, right? That's a different discussion. Yeah.
Well, that's perfect. I just have one last question because I think I read something that you wrote, or I hear you in a conversation about if we conclude, if we accept then that is Jehovah, the pronunciation. So if that have something in common with the name Yeshua, the name of...
Well, so the name, let's maybe we can start with, I don't know what you say in Spanish, Jesus. All right, and so in English we have Jesus, right? So where does that come from? So I was just at the Israel Museum the other day, and they have an ossuary. It's a bone box. And there was a man buried in that bone box whose name was Yehoshua. And it says that. Right, and there's many people named Yehoshua in the first century. It was a very common name. It's like Tom in America.
Yehoshua will be like Joshua, right? Like
so Yehoshua is Joshua.
Joshua. Oh yeah, Josué in Spanish.
Right. So on that man's ossuary, it says Yeshua, and it also says Yeshu. Now later the rabbis took the word Yeshu, which is short for Yehoshua, and they said, oh, that is an acronym that means something bad, right? But that's actually in English we call that a backronym, right? From the word back. It didn't start out as an acronym.
That's really good, a backronym. And so, yeah, because there's a lot of rubbish going around, I guess Gail Riplinger's books are filled with that type of thing. You have certain, Bibles that are NIV, it means a non-inspired version. I guess most of that's just sort of tongue-in-cheek, but there are some serious allegations against things like a PIM. It was like an identification number or something like that Gail Riplinger was talking about, which obviously it wasn't.
It started out Yehoshua, and the Jews in the Galilee didn't pronounce the H sound, the H. So Yehoshua became Yeshua. And then Yeshua became Yeshu because they couldn't pronounce the Ain. Right? It's actually not Yeshua, it's Yeshua.
Yeshua.
Right? So
this is where Davidson, he makes the claim, which is quite a large section in my book, or not a large section, but a large, a weighty claim in my book. And that is that the names were shortened because they were the sacred name. So it was Jehoshua was changed to Joshua because it had the name Jeho in it. And so people were worried about saying the name of God at the wrong place at the wrong time. And so having Jehoshaphat, you could mistakenly say Jehovah Shaphat, but Jehoshaphat was changed to Josaphat, you know, that type of thing. But so that's one of the more weighty things that I put in my book. Could I study more into that and know more about these names? Absolutely. And so that's where I guess, you know, studying Nehemiah's material will be invaluable in looking at all these names.
You can't pronounce Yeshua, then it becomes Yeshu. And then the Greeks took Yeshu, and they didn't have a sh in Greek, and they made it Yesu, which it still is in Italian. It's Yesu. And then Yesu in Greek,
because they don't have the
they don't have a sh in Greek.
The shin.
And then in Greek you end many words with us, like Joseph, Yosef becomes Josephus, Josephus. And so hence Yeshu became Jesus. That's where it comes from. It has nothing to do with Zeus. I've had people say, "Oh, Jesus is Zeus." No.
Well, Jesus, that's just because the Greek is an inflected language and it's nominative. So sometimes it's Jesus, sometimes it's Yesu, and so it just depends on whether it's genitive or however you're looking at the inflection.
That's not from any evidence I've seen. So now if we take back Yesu, Yeshud, Yeshua to Yehoshua. So Yehoshua is Yehovah Yoshia. Yehovah saves. That's the meaning of his name. Joshua, the son of Nun. Actually, right here at the World Congress of Jewish Studies, they have these free sandwiches if you paid your membership. And one of the sandwiches, I want you to get a photo of it and put it here in the video. It's called the Yehoshua sandwich. Why is it called the Yehoshua sandwich? I assume somebody in the kitchen named Yehoshua came up with that formulation. It's a certain type of cheese with lettuce or something. Anyway, so Yehoshua is simply a Hebrew name. Joshua, the son of Nun, was Yehoshua. In the book of Nehemiah, he's called Yeshua, the son of Nun, Yoshua bin Nun. And in Greek, both Jesus and Joshua are Jesus.
Yes, I asked the question because, and with this we finish. I asked the question because start with the Shva, similar because carry the name Yeho.
Right. So Yehoshua is Yehovah Yoshia, Yehovah saves.
Correct.
Right. And that's not even a matter of dispute. That's not some great discovery. That's obvious.
That's obvious in Hebrew. Okay. Well,
I like how he says that. It's not even a matter of dispute. It's obvious, and that's one of the things where I'm sure if James White, Dan Wallace, TurretinFan, Bart Ehrman, anyone who is basically proclaiming the name of Yahweh and saying that what I'm saying about Revelation 16:5 is silly, all you have to do is listen to someone who's a Hebrew expert, who's been speaking Hebrew by the age of 4. Listen to them and what they're saying about the name of God, and it's exactly what I'm saying. But I understand it can be hard to trust that some hick guy like myself can say things correct. But even if broken clocks, right, twice a day, I can get things right. And just because I do sound a bit weird in my Australian accent, and it mightn't sound like I've done my homework, I've done my homework, not on every topic in the world, but just on these ones that I talk about. And so that's why I listen to Nehemiah and just go, yes, agreement, because they are elementary principles of language. These theophoric names are just something that Christians really need to look into, understand it. And then when you come to Revelation 16:5, it's not like a huge, big learning curve. So they're like all frustrated and wondering why they can't understand the whole concept. Well, really, you just need to come up to speed first. Then you'll see this concept very clearly.
Nehemiah, thank you so much for your time. I know that we have another section. I need to go to another
Muchas
section.
gracias.
De nada. Ok. Bueno, eso fue todo por hoy. Esto fue un segmento, una entrevista más con Amano Tanaj, con Nehemiah Gordon, Dr. Nehemiah Gordon. Y espero que esto le haya sido bien informativo y haya respondido muchas de sus preguntas, ¿ok? Así que eso fue todo. Nos vemos la próxima. Shalom, Lejitra.
Shalom.
Okay, so he's bringing out lots and lots of videos, but I think what I'll do next time, I will go through in the playlist. So we missed out on the Yahuwah one because I just thought, it's sort of a bit of a side issue at the moment. But I will listen to that and see whether it's worth going through. Now, this is the one that I've not gone through. And so, and I'm not going to go through it now.
Shalom,
I'm going to finish now. But, yeah, it doesn't seem like it's got... Actually, that's the wrong one. This is the one where he is basically sort of teaching like in a conference or something like that. And he talks about like his testimony. And so I've listened to this a few times since last time. Okay, so he's talking about the Pippi concept of the Greek lettering. Yeah, so this will be very, very interesting to go through this. And he also goes through the little one that I'm putting up on the screen. He puts this on the screen as well. Okay, so he does go through the King James, looks at the name of Jehovah being there. So yeah, this will be a very interesting one to go through. And but I'm going to say that for next time. So unless there's something that anyone wants to discuss, I'm planning on just shutting it down. But if anyone wants to jump on and have a chat, you can jump in now, or forever hold your peace. But I think so. This is part 2, but it's the same picture, but I just changed that to part 2. So you have the 3 I ams in Exodus 3:14. One is Yeh of Yeh, he will be. Hov of Hova, he is. And of Haya, he was. So Jehovah is an archaic third-person singular of the imperfective aspect of the verb to be. That is, he is, was, and will be, which is the reading of Revelation 16:5, which is my main premise is that they've put holy on the end of that because it is a sacred name. It is the sacred name. And Revelation 16:5 holds the holiest form of that, in the sense of the purest form of that being he is and was. It doesn't say is to come, does it? It says is, will be, or shall be. So that is the name of Jehovah. So here it has the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. So it's very interesting. We're learning quite a lot about this. So where am I going to go next? Yes, I'll go to that video. I might listen to some more modern stuff, because I think that this is sort of like, I mean, that's 9 years ago, this video that I want to show next time, which is quite a long time ago. So what do I want to show next time? I guess I'm still in the middle of the Bart Ehrman material, and so that would be interesting to go through. But apart from that, it doesn't seem like anyone wants to jump on board. So
in these perilous times, see from current events how biblical...
Sorry about that. So God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.